Hello, hello. Hope you guys can hear me. Let me know if my audio is working. All right, there we go. So, we're going to be analyzing the Halsey versus Dawson debate. This is a super disappointing debate as far as I'm concerned. The only real positive thing that came out of this debate was, well, I mean, you really get to see just how pathological the Zionists are in defending Israel. I mean, he's just Halsey is so extreme when it comes to defending the atrocities that Israel has perpetrated against the Palestinians. How much he just does not care about what people would say are war crimes or crimes against humanity. You know, I don't really care about the UN, but their definitions are their definitions, and so Ryan Dawson, I don't agree with him politically. I think some of the things he said were kind of detestable, especially when it came to people like Mike Enoch. But we'll get to that. Really, I mean, I really wouldn't recommend anyone watch this debate, whether it was, the constant interruptions for super chats or I don't know, Ryan Dawson's mic not working or Halsey just generally lying. It's not very interesting. But I wanted to do a quick little analysis of it, and then we can just kind of hang out for a little while. So let's go ahead and get started here. Let a couple more people filter in. Yeah, Eternal Entropy, I would give it maybe a 3 or 4 out of 10. Kind of a waste of my time. Kind of not really. I like Ryan Dawson because he's so knowledgeable on the neocon and Zionist question. But outside of that, I mean, his opinion really isn't relevant. So, okay. Should be. Let me know if you guys can see my screen here. Should be up. I'm gonna move stuff on my second monitor. And let's do a little sound test here. Make sure YouTube is actually working.
We were saying that in the group chat yesterday. You actually did. You have a Star of David on the tomahawk.
Look at the screws; they're screwed in by Stars of David.
Jeez, what kind of screwdriver do you need for that? The Star of David driver.
This is just them kind of shooting the shit right now.
You need, Andy, what you need is a screwdriver.
There's the echo.
All right, so let's start it right now.
Okay. Yeah, DFC. It was pretty entertaining sometimes, but I mean, it's just look at this. It's 3 hours and 13 minutes long. Most people don't have time to tune into a 3 hour, 13-minute long live stream. It's way too long. You can condense this down into like maybe 30, 40 minutes if you really pick out the good parts. So this is the very start of the debate. I'll go ahead and let it play. And if you've got any comments or questions or anything, just stick them in the chat there. I've got the chat open on my second monitor. So, Gione, yeah, Ryan is a complete hypocrite when it comes to nationalism. And we'll see that here in his opening statements. Let's go ahead and check it
out. We've discussed a lot of subjects. There's lots of things to talk about tonight. The initial conflict between you two was with respect to an episode where Halsey has appeared, and Ryan watched that episode, and he says everything that this guy is saying is crap. And then we had Ryan come on the show and tell his version of the story. Essentially, I would like to get first an introductory statement from each of you, starting with Ryan, on the question of Jewish influence on geopolitics internationally, and in particular, the role of Israel in military invasions.
All right, so that's our premise. We're looking at how Israel intervenes into geopolitics and how it influences geopolitical conflict in particular. Keep that in mind, because what Halsey is going to do, he's going to try and steer clear of this question the entire time. He's either going to play stupid, as you'll see when it comes to the liberty, or he'll just flat out deny something and say that it try and derail the conversation. So we're going to see a lot of that. Let's keep going.
And on American politics, just so we frame the debate and we know what we're talking about.
And in particular, American politics. Yeah, I forgot about that. So,
Ryan.
Yeah, and the previous thing that I watched, that applied to Mike Enoch being full of crap as well. And I didn't watch the whole thing. I couldn't get through the whole thing. It was just dumb to me. I don't like calling it Jewish influence when we're talking about Israel, even.
That's really, really rich. You're going to call Zionist influence not Jewish influence, but Israel is literally a Jewish state. It's a Jewish ethno state. So the interest of the Israeli government is going to be for the influence of the Jewish people. This is part of the hypocrisy.
Though there are Jewish Zionists, because
yeah, okay. I mean, there's Zionists of all types. I understand that, but to say that Zionist interests are not inherently Jewish interests is completely dishonest.
Jewishness is a much larger category than Zionism. There are plenty of non-Zionist Jews.
Yeah, like I just said, he's trying to paint a picture.
To me, that's like saying something like whatever the CIA does is white interest or something, because
well, the key difference there between the CIA is that America is not an explicit white ethno state. Israel is, and that government acts within the interest of Jewish people. Even if it was just a Jewish religious state where it was only the interest of the religious Jews, it would still be they would be acting in effect in the interest of the Jewish religion.
Because most of the CIA is white. I don't think you can collectivize like that.
Well, you can say that you're not collectivizing, but that's what they do. Those groups are doing it. They work as a collective, essentially.
But there certainly is a lot of Israeli influence in American policy, and a lot of it actually is hard to separate from the interests of the MIC, the military-industrial complex.
He's right here. There is a lot of influence by the MIC, the military-industrial complex. But again, you go back to its source, and you'll find some interesting parentheses.
And so, how much of it is because of AIPAC, how much of it because they have overlapping business interests is very hard to separate out. But it's undeniable that it has been detrimental to the United States to follow these policies for whatever reason.
Yep, Dawson's completely correct here. It's been an absolute disaster for the people of the United States and the people of the countries that Israel has invaded.
Whether it's Lockheed Martin or AIPAC or a combination of all the above. And so, in my opinion, I don't think we would be involved in Syria. I don't think we would have had a war in Iraq if not for influence from not only the Israeli lobby, but also Israeli partisans.
This is also completely true, although I don't know what the timestamp is when they begin to talk about this, but Halsey says that this is a conspiracy theory. Well, we know that there have been Zionist, Israeli, Jewish, whatever you want to call them, that have been constantly harping on the war horn in order to go into war with, in these regions. And it was particularly true. I mean, Netanyahu himself went before, judges or something, some council in Congress, something like that, saying that we needed to go to war with Iraq. So
embedded within the Bush administration at the time.
So, Halsey, do you agree with this version of the statement where Ryan is saying the military-industrial complex has misled America? It has cost billions and trillions of dollars, and it is a negative influence on America.
Now, as much as I appreciate JF's input and his moderation, what he's essentially done with this question is shifted it away from Zionism. He shifted it away from the Israeli lobby, and he's only said that it's the MIC, the military-industrial complex. So look at what Halsey's going to do. He's going to frame it just as that. He's not going to go into the question of Israeli influence, such as AIPAC or the ADL or anything like that. Yeah, so let's keep watching.
Absolutely not. The military-industrial complex, while it does have its negatives, has basically spawned every piece of technology that you've ever used for pleasure, for work, for anything in the last.
Okay, so he's trying to frame it as the state has done something, the military-industrial complex has done something positive in one way, and that somehow outweighs the negatives of all the things that they've done. Now, just because we've gotten things like GPS or the microwave or some consumer electronic or something, some technology, does not mean that we should have spent, what is it, $9 trillion playing in the sandbox of Iraq. See how he's flipping the question here and trying to justify it? It's insanity. And here's another key thing before I forget. Halsey isn't wearing his sunglasses in this video. And now I understand why he wore sunglasses, because the eyes are the window to the soul. And if you look into his eyes, you can really tell that he is fidgety and nervous, and he is calculating the entire time. When he talks, or he's answering a question, or he's being dragged through the mud by Dawson, he's looking away. He looks nervous.
That's 100 years. So the internet came from the military. The idea of airplanes came from the military.
Airplanes, I don't think, came from the military, Halsey. I think you're kind of reaching there. So again, more lies.
These are all things that are built when you decide to build a strong military.
This I agree with. The constant libertarian argument is that these things could have been made privately, but there's really not any private capital investment into these things. So I agree, on the one hand, that this military technology and government spending has provided a lot of benefits. However, it does not outweigh, as I said, the immense amount of taxpayer money and human life that had to go into these conflicts.
One could argue that, oh, they would have made them for civilian purposes anyway, but they wouldn't, because the money wasn't there to develop them, and the need wasn't there for the communication to develop them. People don't develop things like the internet because they say, oh, wow, people will be able to talk easier. You know, they do it for defensive reasons. And I do find it interesting that he says, oh, well, without Israel, we wouldn't have had the Iraq War. The prime minister of Israel at the time, Ariel Sharon, tried tooth and nail to convince Bush not to go to war.
Okay, so he says that the prime minister of Israel tried to get them to not go into the Iraq War. I'm not going to speak to the validity of that statement. I just don't know enough information. But that does not mean that there were no other actors pushing for this in Israel. There were plenty. Benjamin Netanyahu himself, who has been prime minister for a long time, or whatever the hell kind of government they have over there, was pushing for it, was shilling for it. Hundreds of people, thousands of people, billions of dollars in lobbying and funding went into this. So this is literally not an argument. This is such a terrible way to try and deflect this.
The war in Iraq, he said there was no purpose. And then when all said and done, he fell in line because Bush told him he needed support. So the war in Syria, I don't really know so much about the war in Syria because there hasn't.
So here's what he's doing. He's trying to frame it as, oh, I don't really know what's going on in Syria. I don't really know. But then when it comes to when he's talking to someone who isn't as knowledgeable as Dawson, he'll try and play the bully card and say, well, you know, I'm so knowledgeable on this subject and this, that, and the other. But if you're curious about what really happened in Syria, just look up the East versus West interest. You can look up the Greater Israel Plan. You can look at the gas pipeline plans. I've included this sort of in a previous video of mine, which I might link later, but it's just nonsense.
Hasn't been a war in Syria. There's been a conflict.
So now what he's going to do, he's going to try and say that it hasn't been a war in Syria. He's going to play the semantics game.
Conflict with American and Russian interests that have been fighting it out in Syria, Iranian.
So now he's going to point the blame at everyone but Israel's influence in this conflict, essentially.
Interest, Syrian interest, but that was mostly spawned from Obama, who I think everybody would agree is no friend.
So now he's going to try and win the crowd. So he's going to make this, again, constantly what these people do is they try and make it a left versus right debate. They want to try and hide the Israeli component to this discussion.
Of Israel. But Ryan does make an interesting point where he says, well, no, my problem.
Look at the shifty eyes.
Problem isn't with the Jews. My problem is with the Zionists. And this is a point where it was funny because me and Mike Enoch even agreed on this one, that what Ryan is against is ethno-nationalism. What Ryan is against.
Okay, so here Halsey is capitalizing on one of Dawson's weaknesses. So he's trying to appeal to the crowd, essentially here. He's trying to strengthen his argument. So he's going to attack Dawson's politics, what he personally believes, instead of actually attacking the question of, is there Zionist influence in American politics or geopolitics as a whole? He's going to go after Dawson, not personally per se, but he's going to go after his personal political views.
Is collectivizing people as white or Jewish or anything like that. He talks about Israel as an ethno-state, and then he talks about it as a bad thing. He says, no, it's terrible that they're able to enforce their towns to have this because it's an ethno-state, or this because it's an ethno-state, which is interesting because 90% of what we've talked about in our previous debates was, I've always said I'm a fan of an ethno-state. I just don't.
Yeah, again, he's trying to win over the crowd.
Don't want to live in a white ethno-state because I don't consider myself white.
So he says that he's he doesn't want to live in a white ethno state, yet he fervently supports the idea of ethno-nationalism. So that kind of duality, it doesn't really make sense to me. It's obviously a lie. You know, he's just trying to garner support one way or another.
I've given practical advice to people like Mike Enoch and plenty of other people who vouch for me, that I've said that I think that people collectivizing for their common good is a good thing.
Except when it comes to whites actually trying to do that when you put them down.
Even if I disagree with the reason or the why. You know, Ryan has done this quite a bit.
Again, he's personally attacking Ryan. He's trying to turn the crowd against them. It's not going to work because he's evading the question.
I also find it interesting that he's not showing his face. What he's doing is he's showing a picture of a girl who slapped an Israeli soldier.
And now he's going to try and guilt Ryan Dawson into showing his face.
And got arrested and got 8 months in prison for slapping a soldier.
So now what he's doing is he's shifting the topic from one thing to another. Instead of going back to the actual question of the MIC and Zionist and AIPAC and ADL, he's going to shift it to a news discussion based on this person who was just locked up a couple of weeks ago.
Now somehow he's going to justify that slapping a soldier is okay because an Arab Muslim did it?
I'm not sure really. He's trying to derail the discussion. It's very clear, because notice how he doesn't really answer the question. He tries to personally attack Dawson, and now he has shifted to something else.
Which is your typical SJW response.
And he calls him an SJW, which is a loaded term.
To everything. And that's what Ryan is going to keep doing. You know, so let's just keep going.
I wanted to unpack some of the crap you said.
See, Ryan, not so stupid as he thought before. He's going to try and unpack a couple of things and sort of diverge off, or sort of deflect Halsey's deflection here. Let's look at the chat here real quick. Hold on. Yeah, Gundam, Ryan should have kept calling out his pill pull. And Frankfurt School, yeah, they're both merely tools, just different angles. They're assigned from Heap's summer camp to different demographics and different tastes. Yeah, I mean, this is, I don't want to call it bread and circus, but there's no one is winning here.
There's a huge difference between having military technology and specifically going to war in Iraq. You don't need to.
I don't think I made that connection in the first place. I didn't make the connection that having military technology.
That's essentially what he did, though. He tried to deflect by saying, oh, well, the MIC is good. He tries to justify it. But he didn't really make any points.
Was about the war in Iraq. I never said that, and I don't think that you putting words in my mouth is okay for you.
Again, more emotional response. Oh, you're putting words in my mouth. No, that's literally what you said. You failed to really answer the question at all, and you went on bumbling about the MIC and how military tech and funding the state and taxes and all that is good.
Yeah, but Halsey, I was talking about the war in Iraq, and then you just started talking about the military in general. Like,
exactly.
With one sentence about the war in Iraq.
No, a 2-minute diatribe about that. So good on Dawson for trying to steer the conversation back.
Don't act like you were teaching professor style to me like you promised you were going to do and lend into this great thing about Iraq. You said one sentence.
Yeah, that's typically how debates go, Halsey. You make a claim and then you go back and forth. He's trying to do this smugness, which isn't working.
One.
I was talking about the MIC and influence as a question that I was asked about, and I talked specifically about Iraq and Syria.
I hear you.
And then
I hear you, but then he has absolutely no substance to back up his argument.
You took that into a generality and said, oh, well, you're just anti-military, and military's provided a lot of technology. That's what you did.
It has.
Yes, it has, but that doesn't mean we needed to go to war in Iraq.
I didn't say we needed to go to war in Iraq. Did I?
No, you didn't say anything at all about Iraq, Halsey. That's the issue. You never really made any argument at all. You went on a tangent in order to waste time.
In any way intimate that I wanted to go to war in Iraq?
And what's your point? Because we're talking about Iraq.
Exactly. What's your point? We're talking about other things than just the MIC.
You're like, well, the military's made technology. Okay, so
we weren't talking about the war in Iraq. You said a sentence about the war in Iraq. But
so I think that everyone agrees on the fact that military budgets can contribute to innovations. We're talking about the war in Iraq. It seems that you both also agree that we shouldn't have gone to Iraq. Halsey, is that what you're saying?
Good interjection here by JF, trying to steer the conversation back in order. Not perfect, but a good direction.
I'm saying I probably am not coming from the same angle.
Look at his eyes. He can't even look. He can't even look the camera in the eye because he's trying to formulate a lie.
He is, in that if we were going to go to war in Iraq, there's no reason why it should have been fought the way that it was.
I agree that we made a lot of mistakes in Iraq, but we're not talking about how we fought it. This is another Halsey deflection. He's going to start talking about how we fought the war in Iraq. Well, what about the reasons why we went in there in the first place? Thanks, Miss Fasci Hoffmeister, for the compliment. I appreciate it.
Military power was enough that we could have done whatever damage we needed to do if we thought that we were going to need to take on Iraq, and it could have been over in a month.
Pill-pull. Straight up just trying to waste time, essentially, on a non-point. I mean, who doesn't agree with this? This is such a milquetoast way of thinking nowadays, or opinion, sorry. No one disagrees with that.
But instead, we did a military occupation of Iraq, which was probably one of the stupider moves that the American government has made in years.
Well, they certainly knew what was coming. Dick Cheney, when he was Secretary of Defense, long before we invaded Iraq, stated as much in 1994. The reason why in the first Gulf War Saddam Hussein wasn't taken out was because it would lead to a quagmire.
So here's the good thing about Dawson in this debate. He has a lot of information to back up his points, something that Halsey doesn't have at all. So this is really good. This is the only good part of this whole debate, is when you bring up information like this.
And that you'd see Sunni and Shiite and Kurdish factions fighting with each other, threaten the territorial integrity of Turkey, etc. So they're well aware of the quagmire that was going to be created, and did it anyway. And I think that a lot of that, the reason for the occupation, which I agree was a bad way to go to war and a bad strategy, wasn't because of incompetence or ignorance. It was intentional, and that's part of the influence of the MIC. Not everything is positive with the military. A lot of the things they make, they do for the sake of it because it's profiteering. That is a
So now they're going to shift the debate into profiteering in the military-industrial complex, instead of actually getting to the real question, which is, what is the role of Zionist influence in the MI6 or in American geopolitics? Why did we get into the war? So this is just a shift. And I think that Halsey implanted this mind virus into Dawson in order to shift the conversation.
a huge influence, unfortunately, and that does happen. We spent $1.5 trillion on the F-35, and this is a plane that has so many problems. I mean, they've made 3 different versions of it. It doesn't even work. They call it a Bradley fighting vehicle with wings. That was 55 of our casualties in the first Gulf.
So here's the other problem: is a huge info dump on the MIC that isn't totally necessary or relevant to the conversation. No one disagrees with what Ryan is saying, that we have wasteful spending when it comes to the American military. No one disagrees with that. I don't know why he's bringing it up. DFC says he's trying to get Dawson to start yelling back. Halsey loves the blood sports. Also, he's a total mess. The chat found Ryan to be low energy. Yeah, Halsey wants him to yell because it props up his position as being the moral good in the debate, which has been doing the whole time. He's been trying to paint Dawson as somehow, believing in these politics or that politics, but it's not going to work. And as far as Ryan's low energy is concerned, I mean, I don't really care personally, but it is a bit stale, I guess, after a while. And I understand, he said it's early in the morning. He's got a 2-month-old child. He probably doesn't want to wake up anybody in the house. I get that, but you could at least put some oomph into your voice when you're talking. I'm speaking softly now, but at least I have some characterization behind what I'm talking. I have some personality behind my voice.
Gulf War is a Bradley fighting vehicle. This is something we spent $11 billion on. It had aluminum walls. It was a hybrid everything that could do nothing. We spent $5 billion, thanks to John Kerry, and largely on this digital camo that it's like 4 different colors. It couldn't help you with anything, but they just spend money for the sake of it a lot of times. And then they can hide behind the fact that everybody wants to support the military. It's kind of one of those untouchable things like the environment or health or education. Everybody's pro that. But that allows a lot of corruption because they can say, oh, well, you're opposing this specific thing, then you don't like the military in general, and you're not supporting the troops, blah, blah, blah. And that is what allows for a lot of military waste. And the U.S. is king in military waste.
Well,
Yes,
I don't
we know.
disagree
Get
with
to
that
it.
point, and I don't disagree that the F-35 has not been what it was built up to be by far. When you do science, when you do technology, when you create things, you're going to.
When you do the science, I'm a big brain science man over here. Call me Jim fucking Scienceman.
Have
Jesus
failures.
Christ, get to the fucking
There are going to
point.
be things that you chase down the rabbit hole that wind up going way over budget and way too far, but they're not going to work. And sometimes finding out something is not going to work is just.
Okay, here Halsey again is filibustering. He's harping on about military expenditure. That's not the question or the topic at hand. So get to the fucking point.
as important as finding out something is going to work. So you can't embark on any expedition in technology or science with the idea that I will only do this if it's going to work in the end.
Which is a shit argument, even if you were only talking about military expenditure, because he's not talking about low, what's the term? Low bid contracts or no bid contracts. He's not talking about the lobbying. He's not talking about the influence of certain companies like Northrop Grumman when it comes to lobbying for these contracts. They're not bringing up anything of substance. This is a very, very low IQ discussion, to be honest. Yeah, Kyle F. Halsey is very boring.
Yeah, but that in this specific example is not what happened. This was profit.
And there goes JF trying to interject because he can see the conversation is steering in the wrong direction.
Profiteering. The Bradley fighting example too. That the Bradley fighting vehicle, they know that aluminum walls are not good at stopping bullets.
No shit.
But Alco wanted it that way, and that's how it came. And there were people in the DoD that vehemently opposed this, and they were fudging tests and things. They fudged the tests for the F-35 and the F-22. They just kept making the test easier until they could pass them, because they'd already sunk so much money in, and you got career people that need to save face, etc. And so, yes, I agree that sometimes failure is what you need in science generally, but specifically, which is what we're talking about, that's not the case here. They did it because of profiteering.
Now, the question is, why did they do it and who was behind it? But I don't think they're going to get to that.
So we have a few super chats. Totally Not Troll 25 PLN says, Halsey got jealous of Nick the Knife Fuentes
Oh, this is actually good. I'm not going to skip over this.
Nickname. So he had but an axe. Sad.
Yeah, but
and we have Joshua.
Yeah, but you know what? I'm old enough that I know how to use them. Did you see him cut himself the other day when he pulled out the little pet knife?
No, he didn't. He did.
He cut his hand in the middle of the Tokes debate, and then he's.
Sorry, Nicky boy, I had to roast you a little bit there. Let's skip ahead a little bit back to the debate. We're at 22 minutes. Yeah, some messages in the chat. Andy does seem to check out quite a bit. I don't know, maybe he's over his head or what, but he's not really actively moderating.
$6 and get it immediately.
Okay. Now, Halsey mentioned the picture of the girl that you're using as an avatar. Can you tell us the story of this girl?
Ahmed Tamimi, yeah. Her uncle was killed. Her cousins have been killed, and at least 10 of her family members.
Okay, so they've shifted away from the initial question, which still has yet to be answered or expounded upon. Now they're going into specific examples of Israeli violence against Palestinians.
Have been arrested. They beat the shit out of her brother. He was like 10 years old. He had a broken arm, and they're slamming his face in a rock. And so some kids attacked Israeli soldier. And then after murdering her uncle, some soldiers were in her yard, her private property, and her and I'm not sure if it's.
Sorry to kind of derail the video here. I'm engaging with the chat. The flat earth debate. Oh, Jesus Christ. I mean, if you haven't seen my 16-second video on that, go check it out. But it's not only disappointing, but as far as I'm concerned, it's like a waste of my time. Like, I tried to tune in to maybe that they would get somewhere, but it was essentially a fan of the show that kind of had some strange ideas, right? A typical flat earth spiel. Excel says, I was hoping the debate would have been more about Zionist control of the West, and I wish Ryan was better prepared, more high energy. This was sad. Exactly. Yeah, DFC, the flat earther was a fake flat earther and a fan of the show, so it was a big old huge waste of time. Todd Whalen says, I ignore everything flat earth. You should, because it's a parasite.
There's a friend or cousin is with her, and they're both sort of kicking and spatting, and soldier spits back, but it's pretty restrained, doesn't do anything, and she slaps him in the face. And she also tried to kick him in the shin. then nothing really happened with that. No one cared. But then about 4 days after, a video of it was leaked. And because that was embarrassing, they came and got her in the middle of the night. And she is in prison now for the next 8 months.
So, I mean, I'm kind of torn here because on the one hand, you have two groups of people where none of my interests lie, so I could not give less of a shit what happens between them. But at the same time, this really does show the pathology of the IDF and Zionism as a whole.
So this happened recently?
A few weeks ago.
A couple weeks ago, yeah,
Jesus.
a couple weeks ago.
So, Halsey, do you agree that the Israeli state exists in the violation and in the violence being committed against the Palestinian people?
Yep, and that's exactly where, if we're not going to answer the question of lobbyist influence or the real topics behind the MIC, at least we can kind of touch on the atrocity of the occupying government, I guess you could call it.
I didn't understand the question.
Do you agree that the Israeli state exists in violation of the rights and in violence being committed toward the Palestinian people?
Oh, yeah. Todd Whalen, yeah. Yeah, I'm pretty good at names. I just can't remember them very well. So the question is, as it is framed now, as JF has pointed out, is do you acknowledge the violence that Israel has to perpetrate against the, I mean, I don't want to call them natives because they're not really, sort of, I guess, the people who've been living there for a while. Do you acknowledge the violence and illegitimacy of the things that Israel does against the Palestinian people? That's the question.
Absolutely not. Israel is a state that has a root back in that land 33,500 years.
So now what Halsey's going to do is he's going to make the 3,000-year argument or 3,500-year argument, whatever you want to call it, where he essentially says Israel has a claim to this land because some thousands of years ago, they were supposedly the native people. And I think the only source he uses to back this up is biblical history. Now, I enjoy history. I can take some things in the Bible as historical record, but most of the Bible cannot be taken as legitimate historical fact. You have to be very careful when you're talking about the ancient text because a lot of this stuff can be falsified. Just because someone wrote something down 3,000 years ago and buried it in the ground does not make, when someone digs it up, legitimate. And this is the issue.
You look at how the United Nations defines indigenous people, Jews fit every single metric of the indigenous people of that land.
Now, Todd Whalen says, will we be allowed Europe if we lost control of it for 3,000 years? Yes, because we have documented everything. There is no question as to the legitimacy of the ownership of that land. But when it comes to Israel, you have a diaspora that was spread out over the entire world. They didn't own these states. Who knows when the last time they lived there? Perhaps during the Roman conquest of Judea, but even that is sort of in dispute. Yeah, and as Korok says, but the modern Jews aren't the same as the ancient Jews. And there are very different types of Jews. You have different religious sects. You have different ethnicities that have interbred with Europeans. Do these people have a right to this land? It's already a shaky claimant. You know, these things call into question the legitimacy of that. So this is the argument that Halsey is making.
And any violence that's brought on by the Arab side is well-earned, well-deserved, and I'm just sad that they're not willing to kick more ass when it comes to keeping themselves safe.
And Ryan,
just real quick. So Halsey is defending this violence from the Israeli state in defending its land territory. I can't say I disagree. However, it's extremely pathological, and you'll see how angry he gets. You can practically see his neck fat wobbling with rage every time he talks about a Palestinian throwing a bottle at an IDF soldier.
Is that correct that you disagree with this assessment of Israel?
I disagree with the 3,500 claim. It's biblical mythology. Jews,
That's exactly what I was talking about. It's a biblical mythology.
have always lived in Palestine, but not as a majority. In the 1800s, they were about 5% Jewish, 15% Christian, the rest Muslim. The Palestinians are also indigenous to the land. Even in the biblical account, they're called the Philistines.
Now, I don't really know a whole lot about the whole Philistines argument. I can't speak to the legitimacy of that, but if it holds true, then it holds true, and they'll get into that later.
Which you see the Joshua and all the other things, the mythology of King David killing a giant and so on, fighting with them. Samson from the Bible killing 1,000 Palestinians or Philistines with the jawbone of an ass. Now, I don't think these miracles happened. But you could argue like, well, maybe something like that happened, but not. It's been embellished, whatever, because it's religion. But I don't think you racially inherit land from thousands of year absence, and I don't think you can displace people who are also indigenous. There's no reason.
So here we come down to a disagreement I have with Dawson. Maybe he didn't expand upon this in a very rational way, but you can make a claim to land if it's documented. But if it's just coming out of a holy text, it's shaky as it is. And if you have to rely upon mythos to make a claim to a certain sect of land, well, anybody can write anything and make it true.
Reason why you can't both live on the same piece of dirt. But I don't have a problem with the Israeli state as far as Israeli proper. I mean, after the Holocaust, I think that's why the UN thought, look.
Uh-oh, Holocaust alarm, Holocaust alarm. Todd Whalen says, I have no idea about the history of Israel. Were Jews the indigenous people of Israel? It depends on which tribe you're talking about, because there's several exoduses of, or exodi, I don't know how you would say it, but there's many different groups who are laying claim to it today, and many of them are not native people of Judea, as it were back in the day, in the biblical times.
We have to do something. Although we did win World War II, so Jews didn't actually have to go anywhere, but many had been there. It's a long, complicated process.
National Socialist says Canaanites are indigenous. The Levantines are indigenous. There's many different genetic groups that you could call indigenous to the region, including some intermixing with Egyptians, which I cannot wait for the Kangs debate. But Kyle says the Bible provides accounts of 12 tribes of Israel. Yep, that's true. That's what we were just talking about.
Process started going there from 1890s, especially in the 1930s, and then obviously in the 40s, to escape persecution in Europe. So they needed a homeland or a place to be safe, since at that time they didn't know they were going to win World War II. So they're immigrating in the middle of it, and but that was a bad foresight, because it was not a.
Good to see a little Anglo-Saxon pride. Halsey said he'd fight alongside whites against an ethno-state because most whites despise white nationalism, and yet he states on this stream he looks forward to living next to the white ethno-state. This comes from Sachs. And yeah, it's just a 3.5 hour, or 3.25 hours of hypocrisy. That's it. Nothing more.
Land for what they say, people without a land, or land without a people, but there wasn't land without people. There were people already there. And
Kareem said Hitler gave the Jews plenty of opportunity to leave. If you don't know about this, actually what the Third Reich did is that they actually paid people to leave. They paid the native German Jews to leave. They gave them tools. They gave them agricultural equipment like tractors and stuff. And this is during them recovering from the economy of the Weimar Republic. So, I mean, there's no conceivable way you can argue against this. They gave them plenty of opportune time to leave and go there. Now, do I agree with the funding of this? Well, it's kind of up in the air at this point, but oh, hey, Babylonian Hebrew, what's going on? He says, nearly all Jews today have Levantine, autosomal, and Y DNA, indicating a common origin around the Levant, likely from an ancient Judea and Israel. Yeah, I understand that, but there's a lot of admixture as well. We can talk more about that later.
They got displaced. Now, Israel being Israel, let's say to the 1967 border, is not going anywhere. They put a lot of labor into that land and built that up, and they should be allowed to live there and have an Israeli state. But I have a huge problem with the settlements in the West Bank, which are racial colonization brought about by violence and home demolitions and that kind of thing. There's no justification for that. And it causes problems for Israel and Palestine to maintain this military occupation and settlements. And they are internationally illegal. And the UN just recently condemned it again with a resolution. I think it was 2-3.
So now we're going to get into the United Nations debate. And on the one hand, the United Nations is just, I mean, it's a limp-wristed organization that tries to slap sanctions on people and things like that. But on the other hand, Israel's legitimacy was recognized first by the United States and, well, the United Nations essentially, because it's a slave to the United States.
Three, 4, which, you know, the UN routinely condemns Israel, but usually the US, because they have a permanent membership on the Security Council, vetoes everything. And last time they abstained, so the vote was 14-0, because the rest of the world, they know. And they were condemning Israeli settlements. Israeli settlements absolutely exacerbate the problem. It's like,
so now we're going to get into the settlement debate. Are the Israeli settlements legitimate? And I would have to say no, because what they're essentially doing is they're just bulldozing people's homes and then covering it up with Israeli homes and settling Israeli people there. Now, I've seen plenty of videos from even Vice News where they go to Israel and they go and they interview these colonizers, I guess you could use the term, and the Jewish people who are there are very fervent in their belief that all of this land belongs to them, and they're perfectly fine with ethnically cleansing the native people who live there, bulldozing their homes, things like that, and it's just detestable what they're doing. And look at how Halsey will defend this.
Land annexation, and it's brought about through violence, and this isn't the same as an ethno-state of free voluntary exchange and who you want to live near or what have you. This is just a violent colonial export that just murders and confiscates land through force and protects it with a standing army against civilians. And that is the problem I have with Israel, and the U.S. is subsidizing the entire thing, and I have a problem with that as well.
So I agree with all of what Dawson just said. However, I would include a couple of things on top of that. But essentially, the easiest argument to make against Israel is that they're sucking taxpayers dry in the United States. My interests do not lie in a foreign country. I cannot possibly understand who could support this except for evangelical Christians and Jewish lobby groups in the United States.
On the question of settlements, it does seem that settlement is not a response of self-defense. It does seem that it is a genetic overriding policy that helps a people gain a majority or gain in numbers within the boundaries of where another people live. What are your thoughts on settlements in Israel?
Number one, I don't have a problem with settlements, obviously. And number two, the issues, I mean, first of all, there was a lot of crap that he just threw in there to kind of give himself some background. When he talks about the Arabs being the relatives of the Philistines.
Okay, so here's what he's doing. He's shifting away from the question of settlements. Now, he's already come out and defended them, but he's not going to substantiate that argument at all. So what he's going to do is he's going to shift towards the Philistine deflection. So let's watch that shit show unfold.
First of all, the same books that talk about the Philistines disappearing. Secondly, I find it funny he mentions the word Philistine because it means invaders in Hebrew. Thirdly, the area was called Palestine when Rome conquered it after a war with the Jews in.
Yes, Halsey, we know that. No one disagrees with that. What is this tangent you've gone on now about the Romans? It doesn't matter at this point.
I think it was the year 67, and named it Palestina after the Philistines as an insult to the Jews. So it wasn't that the Philistines came before the Palestine area. It was the opposite. It was that Palestine was brought about as an insult because of the Philistines.
Babylonian Hebrew says Arabs are totally unrelated to Philistines. That was a dishonest little lie by Ryan. Like when he says there is no evidence for King David. Yeah, I mean, I don't really know what the historical, quote unquote, historical mythology of the Bible has to do with this discussion in and of itself. Unless, I mean, maybe if you're talking about the legitimacy of Israel, but at this point, we're not talking about that legitimacy. We're talking about the acts of violence that they're committing and the influence they have over the Western world. So again, they're shifting the question away. And as to the evidence for King David, yeah, I agree. There's plenty of evidence for there being a Judea. That's perfectly reasonable.
But the Bible mentions Arabs all over the place. So they obviously were a distinct, separate people from the Philistines. Secondly, the idea of Israeli settlements can only be a settlement on occupied land if it was occupied land, which it isn't. The 48 border is an armistice line. That's where the war stopped. After that, there was no Palestinian state in the West Bank and Gaza. The Gaza.
So he's going to make a legal argument for the disputed borders of Israel. It's fine if you want to make that argument, but it still does not make the acts of violence committed against them legitimate. And this is kind of where we get into the ethical argument against their actions. But let's keep going.
Gaza was ruled by Egypt because that's where their armies stopped. And the West Bank was ruled by Jordan, where their armies stopped. In 1967, when Jordan and Egypt both lost a war, Israel took those lands back. Now, they didn't forcibly expel all the Palestinians from those lands, as they were well in their right to do, but they decided to build settlements there instead.
No. First, no. Yeah. That goes against the Fourth Geneva Convention, Article 49, about annexing territory, even if it is conquered in a war. And this is private property. It's not established by whether there's a Palestinian state or not. If people living in a home and you go there with a bulldozer and knock it over and set up a Jewish...
So here's the issue with this particular portion of the debate. I don't really care what happens between these two groups. The problem is that those Merkava tanks that are turning children, Palestinian children, into road bumps are paid for by me. The money comes out of my pocket. This is an issue. I take great offense to this.
Jewish-only colony. That's just ethnic cleansing and has been internationally condemned.
Don't worry about it, Babylon Hebrew. I appreciate your input on some things that I might not be as knowledgeable on.
And it is recognized as internationally illegal. And if you want to say, well, the UN, who cares? That Israel was created by the UN through the UN mandate in the first place. The same body, political body, is saying that these settlements are illegal and they break the Fourth Geneva Convention. Because that's what they're doing. It's ethnic cleansing. They're destroying private property and taking it for, the self-proclaimed chosen race of God, where God's a real estate agent. God is not a real estate agent, and there's no archaeological evidence for the King David and all the rest of it.
So, yeah, I disagree with that. There is archaeological evidence of Judea.
Jews were living
which is not true.
Palestine with Philistines.
Which is not true.
Not just disappear. It sounds like all the Arabs were just purged out of the land, and I mean, that would be conquest as well. It's just ridiculous to say, well, like thousands of years ago, my particular group of people used to live here, even though some of them are still living there. Like they said, they've always had.
I got to chime in on the chat. National Socialist says IDF women are hot though, such a mental conflict. I would appreciate it if you wouldn't post propaganda in my chat. Those pictures you see of IDF women, they're literal propaganda by the Zionist. Hebrew chimes in, Halsey is wrong in thinking neocon Israeli hawk interests align with the USA ones even closely. I generally think Israel is not that good of an ally. Yeah, it shouldn't be an ally of ours at all. Their interests do not align with ours in any way, shape, or form.
Between 3 and 5% population there, and all over the Middle East, all over the world, Jews have lived everywhere, but there's no reason to exclusively grant land to a specific religion or ethnic group. I don't agree with Islamic State. I don't agree with the Jewish state. I don't agree with giving states based on theocracy or land claims. And what's really baffling to me is how a lot of atheist Jews don't believe in God, but they still refer to this God as the real estate, like, oh, well, God gave us this land. This is our...
I have also heard this argument from non-religious ethnic Jews that they are still the chosen people, and they might be saying it ironically, but they're still using that argument to defend the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians. So I don't know, Halsey, what's your going to comeback going to be?
Promised land. And that kind of religious layer on it makes it extra hard to deal with. I don't think there is a solution because you've got crazies on all sides. There was the Palestinian riots in the 1920s where they went around. They didn't attack the Christians, but they attacked the Jews. I think 5 Jews died and 4 Arabs died.
69 in Hebron alone.
I'm talking about 1921 first.
So this is another thing that Halsey will do. He'll try to interject into a particular event. with some comment or something, and he just said, you know, he's just trying to dispute the number killed or whatever, but he's not actually knowledgeable, or he doesn't actually understand what the topic is, so it's more attempts at derailing things.
There were riots in 21 as well, 5 dead and 4 Arabs, and hundreds of Jews got injured. So it wasn't like out of the blue, and they did this in response to the Balfour Declaration because they felt like, hey, we've been living here continuously for centuries, and suddenly, because they say they were here thousands of years ago, we have all these Europeans migrating down here. And
So Dawson calls them Europeans. I find that grossly offensive. They're not Europeans, so if we could not refer to them as that.
buying up land and changing their culture. You see a lot of Europe today is upset with the migrants from the third world that are changing their culture.
All right, hold on. Kareem says we should still be allies with Israel. We just need to be tougher on them instead of worshiping them. No, we shouldn't be allies with them at all. Not because of the way they've acted towards the West. I would be in favor of completely cutting off ties to them 100%. Aid, military, everything, technology. They need to pay for the crimes that they've wrought upon Western people. There's no way to come to a conclusion about this in any other way. They've just acted detestably.
And bringing in alternative culture, alternative religion, alternative beliefs. And there's going to be a culture clash. And the same thing happened with Palestinians. Now, that isn't justice.
So Dawson seems to understand the cultural clash of civilizations, yet he's against the ethno-state, is there not some kind of contradiction there? You understand that there's going to be clashes between people of different cultures?
By violence. But the violence, with Haganah and Palmach, it was birthed in violence. The Jewish terrorist gangs were murdering the British and attacking police stations, blowing up trains and hotels, and threw grenades in windows and murdered Palestinians and raped people and mutilated bodies.
I generally wouldn't go right for the jugular with the emotional argument of terrorism, but in this particular debate, I would absolutely, because this is what they've been doing since even slightly before the establishment of the State of Israel. Look at the actions of the prime ministers that they've elected, who are literal terrorists, who committed acts of terrorism in Egypt, in Europe, in Greater Palestine, in Jordan, and even some parts of Saudi Arabia.
Dari Yassin's a famous example. That was all 5 weeks before the war started in 48, was with the Arab armies, the 5 Arab armies attacking not the Jewish agency, but the Etzel Brigade, and Haganah, Stern, and Irgun had already gone through villages and massacred people, hundreds of people. And then when they showed up, Palestinians were fleeing, of course. And then they lost the war, but again, you don't cede territory in war.
Which, I mean, I guess in modern conditions is something simple that I disagree with Dawson on. If you beat someone in a war, you can absolutely take territory. That's pretty much why most wars have been fought, is over territory and resources. So not sure what he's getting at with that. He's sticking very closely to the United Nations argument, which is kind of pointless.
According to the Geneva Conventions, and that is what the UN has internationally recognized, and even the US abstained from that vote just recently. And so these settlements are illegal, whether you agree with them. You think you should have ethnic colonies and confiscate private land and run over kids with bulldozers. If that's what you want to be, just ardent racist, that's fine. But it's still internationally illegal.
Well, I do find a couple points that you just made interesting, is that you said you're against a Jewish state, you're against a Muslim state, but you don't seem to be against a Japanese state where you live and 98% of the population.
All right. Getting real fucking tired of this shit. So Halsey again is deflecting off of the Israeli violence question. He's not going to answer any of this because he can't. He cannot possibly defend this in any other way until his back is against the wall, and he just becomes so pathological in his defense of the brutality of the Israeli state. I'll say it again, I don't particularly care about any groups, but when my tax money is buying the rifles that are going into the hands of the IDF, I have to take great offense at this. So now he's going to deflect and talk about the ethno-state in Japan, which it's so obvious it's a deflection.
Population is Japanese. You don't seem to have a problem with your own ethno-state, which you live in in order to accomplish its goals. You also don't seem to have a problem with American military aid going to Japan, as American military.
Japanese are not bulldozing down homes and confiscating land from
every country does that. It's called eminent domain. If you own a land, you can knock down whatever you.
Uh-oh, Halsey, we're getting a little bit authoritarian there. I thought you were a freedom-loving guy. Look at his pathology as he defends the Israeli interests.
Want for whatever you want.
Yes, you have to pay for property.
You can
Purchase it.
Secondly, nobody is not.
No, every country is not bulldozing down houses and creating ethnic states. And Japan is the way it is because it's an island nation and because the language is only on this island, and they have strict immigration policies because they become Chinese overnight if they didn't. But I'm living here. You're allowed to come to Japan. You can move to Japan of any ethnicity. As long as you speak Japanese and can get a job, you can immigrate here legally. You cannot go to a Jewish settlement unless you're of the correct ethnic religious category.
You can't go to a Jewish settlement unless you're of the correct, what did you say? Religious ethnicity?
Ethnic religious category, a circ.
So there's another thing that Halsey does. I don't know if he's autistic or if he's just got cum in his ears or something, but he seems to not understand what Dawson is saying. It's pretty simple. Ethno-religious. Ethnicity, religion. Very simple. Come on, keep up, man.
No, not really, because I've seen Ethiopian who are black. I've seen Indian who are Chinese. I've seen Sephardi Jews who are of Middle Eastern origin. I've seen European.
Yeah, okay. So he's seen various groups of people in Israel, but is he actually answering the question of who is allowed to get subsidy by the Israeli government? It's only this particular ethnic group who is allowed to make claims and have the government cover it up.
Jews in the settlement. In fact, I've seen lots of different ethnicities.
Yeah, you got to be Jewish. It doesn't matter if you're Sephardic or Ashkenazi or whatever.
Well, those are Israeli citizens. A country can decide what citizens live in its towns. Like if you're claiming that they don't allow the Palestinians to live in the settlements, they're not citizens.
But like Japan, though, right?
It's their land that is forcibly taken.
So here's actually a high IQ intervention in the first words that Andy has spoken in 36 or 25 minutes or so. So
from them to set up a Jewish-only colony.
Yeah,
they can't even
don't lose the war.
There.
Don't lose the
Right. So now again, Halsey is saying, no, don't lose the war. Don't lose the war.
And you don't have anything to worry about it.
No, that's not true. When you lose a war, you don't cede territory.
Ryan is wrong. You can absolutely cede territory from a loser in a war.
Oh, you don't? Okay.
No.
Okay.
That's what it was internationally agreed upon in Geneva. That's what I've said like 6 times now.
No, you constantly reference the UN, and every time you do, it's so cringe. I don't even know what to do.
Oh, it's so cringe. Oh, it's so cringe. Even though he hasn't made a single fucking argument this entire time.
The UN created Israel, so you can't have it both ways.
No, a war created Israel. The UN said that we will.
War did not create Israel. Western powers created Israel and gave them legitimacy and gave them the weapons to defend themselves against the other quote-unquote native people.
Agreed to the establishment of a Jewish state. They made a Swiss cheese little area where they would allow Jews to live in between 3 swaths of Arabs, and then 5 armies invade. They want it at the tip of a gun. Don't believe for 1 second that the UN granted.
So again, Halsey getting very angry. His fat jowls are jiggling at high speeds at this point, but you can see that he doesn't really understand what the argument is. It's not that the UN granted them this land; it gave them legitimacy in the realm of geopolitics, which is something that Ryan Dawson understands very well.
White papers of 39 are the one that had this.
The one that gave them Jordan as well, and then halfway through it, they decided to take half of Jordan back from the Jewish homeland and give it to the Arabs. Wait, not even the Arabs. They gave it to Hashemites. Hashemites didn't live in Jordan. They were from Saudi Arabia. They were imported to be trained by the British to take over Jordan and have half of the mandated Jewish home given to them. But I don't hear you bitching about that. I don't hear you bitching about them deciding to give that to the Hashemites, who are invaders. They're not native to there, and they still control it to this day. As a matter of fact, they have a nice long history of butchering Palestinian Arabs all over the place, hence why Black September was created. So I love your selective outrage and your selective knowledge of how benevolent the UN is when it agrees.
Okay, so again, we're caught up on the question of the legitimacy of the state and how it was created. rather than actually touching on the subject of this debate, which was the influence of a foreign power on the United States and the rest of Western Europe and the funding of the State of Israel.
Agrees with you, but how they just can be ignored whenever it doesn't.
So Ryan, on the I don't know, someone muted Ryan?
Nope.
Okay, this is the point where Ryan's mic really cuts out. I think it's like 30 minutes until he starts talking again or something like that. I don't know.
I think you'll need to unmute yourself, Ryan, so we can hear you on the question of, do you have a double standard there?
It's kind of a shame that JF keeps pushing this, but let's keep watching.
We're not hearing you. I think we lost your microphone.
He's muted right now. I don't know if it's. Maybe he's frozen.
Yeah. Hey Ryan, if you want to fix, I thought
Peak boomer tech. Let me tell you. Poor performance by Dawson here. Let's just skip ahead. Come on, YouTube. Stop being a piece of shit.
A truly independent state.
Yeah, like a state, not just like an area.
That is not under federal regulation.
I mean, the reservations are not under federal regulation.
Okay, so now they spend a couple of minutes talking about Native Americans, which has nothing to do with this debate. I understand they're filling time, but, you know, for the love of God, can we get back to the subject at hand? Okay, when does Dawson really start talking? About right here. I need some elevator music.
The cultures vary so widely between Native Americans. You got to think
Oh, he's back to the Native American question. God damn it.
California is as far away from Florida as, you know, England is from Russia, and they're just as different and always were. And so, and then that would extend also into the Caribbean. And
so Halsey and the rest of them are going to want to harp on this for a while. Let's just keep skipping ahead here. Kyle F says, great analysis, my friend. When will you do the next one? I mean, I've never done one live. I usually just kind of do it. I write it down. I have a notebook here full of all my notes. So that's how most of my videos get done. But I thought it'd be fun. I wanted to live stream anyway. So we're doing it live.
the third largest party in Israeli politics saying
Here we go.
things like Palestinians give birth to little snakes. And so that kind of flagrant racism and extremism has a backlash towards
racism, extremism. Come on, Ryan, you got better arguments than that.
Jews in general, which you shouldn't collectively judge all Jews by what extremists are doing, but that's the result, whether you like it or not. And so I oppose it for that reason. And yeah, obviously the AIPAC has had an enormous influence over American foreign policy, and they used to be called the ZOA, the Zionist Organization of America. Before that was the Zionist Council, and it then finally settled on AIPAC. But Robert Kennedy, when he was Attorney General, gave him a moratorium, 72 hours, that they were going to have to register their lobby as a foreign agent. But then his brother was assassinated, and
big coincidence, huh? Really gets my gears turning. Really activates my almonds.
Kind of just dropped it, and then Johnson had no interest in it. But they've done things. I mean, they've been stealing technology and even nuclear material from the United States, and they just get a pass. And now we've got over $500 million cleanup in Apollo, Pennsylvania, where they dumped all this highly enriched uranium and nuclear waste, and that all ended up in Israel and Dimona. But who gets stuck with the bill? So
here's a great argument that Dawson brings out for Halsey to kind of fumble all over, is the fact that uranium, and in particular very, very pure enriched uranium-235, I think 235B, was stolen from the United States and taken into Israel. So let's watch Halsey kind of fumble over this.
It's not in America's interest. If Trump's want to put America first, and I'm happy he wants to pull out of Syria, and I'm glad he wants to talk to North Korea, but when it comes to Israel and the Kushners, etc., that's he's deeply in their pockets. And earlier, when I was talking about the UN resolution that recently passed, that opened up this so-called Russia Gate with Michael Flynn, who used to work in the DIA.
So here, Dawson makes such a great point about the stolen uranium, but then gets off into this diatribe about the Russia investigation. It's such an easy way for Halsey to get his claws around a deflection. Stop doing it, Dawson. Stick to the point. Make a point. Get to it. Like, stop meandering around a bush. You're not a grazing animal. You're not a giraffe or a deer. Like, get to the point and hammer him home. This is one of the things that I keep telling people, is that when you're debating someone as slimy as Halsey, get to the point. Make your point as short and concise as possible. And I don't think he was planning for this at all. I thought this was going to be a shutdown, but it wasn't, because Dawson wasn't prepared.
Well, he's the director of the DIA. And then he was going to join the Trump administration. And then, of course, we have the Robert Mueller investigation into him. And it was called Russiagate because supposedly he had tried to bribe the Russians to vote to veto this resolution. They didn't. And he wasn't only asked to do that. He was asked to contact all the Permanent Security Council members and bribe them, or, pressure them, not give them money, but pressure them to change their vote and to vote against the resolution condemning Israeli settlements. And that was the legwork for that was from Jared Kushner, who went to Flynn, and Jared Kushner was asked by Netanyahu himself.
Okay, so we're still on this issue of Russiagate, and I think it's leading somewhere. We'll see, but it's a distraction from the topic at hand, I believe.
To stay at the Kushner's house. He slept in Jared's bed. They have a very tight relationship. So it was the Israelis that were actually pressuring the U.S. to change its vote, and pressuring Russia to change its vote, pressuring other states to change their vote on the Security Council. And the media wanted none of it.
So it took him, like 2-3 minutes to finally get around to the point that Israel was sort of behind this whole Russian thing. Sort of, in a way. It took him way too long to get to that point.
They're chasing down Russia constantly. Everything's Russia. I mean, Hillary was more than capable of losing an election all by herself. It wasn't Russian hackers, but you see this sustained anti-Russia agenda, and yet the Israelis are caught doing the exact thing that Russia was accused on, and nothing happens.
There we go. Boom. Come on, Halsey, respond.
So, Halsey, do you agree with this reading of the role of Netanyahu in possibly influencing current American administrations?
There we go. Okay, so now we're talking about Israeli influence in American politics.
Netanyahu is ridiculous as far as I'm concerned.
Okay, so he's trying to frame his viewpoint on Netanyahu as some crazy guy. Okay, yeah, sure, Halsey, yeah.
I've been a big fan of his, and I've been following his political...
Oh, I've never been a fan of Netanyahu, yet I support all of his policies. Oh, big surprise.
Career for a very long time.
We agree on something.
But what Ryan said was, again, there were a lot of leading statements in there. And he said that AIPAC would have to register under FARA, right? And that Kennedy had given them an ultimatum that they would have to register under FARA. The reason that no one has asked them to do so since then is because they would disband AIPAC in about 15 seconds. They would restate it, rename it probably what it should be named, which is the Evangelical Christian Organization of America, because that's where the majority of their money comes from.
Okay, 2 points on here. One, he's technically correct. They would immediately disband and reform it somewhere else. So not really an issue. I agree on that. They're going to be as slimy as possible. The issue here is he tries to frame AIPAC and the ADL as being... What he's saying is that because they get their funding from a particular source, that must mean that whoever's funding it, it must be for their interest. However, if you look at the actual policies of the group, they're still supporting Zionism. That's the primary role. It's not the evangelical Christian lobby. They have their own lobby. This is in particular to Zionism in and of itself. So he's trying to frame it in a different way.
And very influential rich Jews. So they understand that when people show up to AIPAC events and listen to what AIPAC says,
as I just said, disciple of Bugs Bunny 14, Alinsky 101, blame your enemies of what you're doing. The tribe has been implementing this tactic for years. Exactly.
It's not because they're pandering to a Jewish Israeli lobby. They're pandering to an evangelical Christian.
Oh, is that so? Interesting.
Christian lobby, which is a massive amount of their support. Obviously.
Yes, because they support Zionism. They support the state of Israel. It's not an evangelical lobbying group per se. It's about the interest of Israel.
For the Kennedys, this is not true. They're against the evangelical Christians because they're always been traditionally right wing. Secondly, he was talking about how the UN resolution that they tried them not to do. This resolution was put to the table after Obama had already been.
And here he goes again, harping on Obama, trying to win the support of the anti-Obama crowd. Not going to work. Can't shift the blame to Obama.
Done, and Trump had been elected. So the reason that the Trump administration had decided that this was something that they wanted to stop was because they realized that Obama was strictly doing this to create a foreign policy mess for them right as they walked into the White House.
Yeah, sure.
So they asked the others, they said, listen, this is not going to fly once Trump takes office. So it's in your interest to not jump on this bandwagon and get this stupid UN resolution passed, because no one in America gives 1/10 of one shit about what the UN says about basically anything.
While I don't disagree, you have to realize that the UN does have some legitimate power in the same things that they say.
So if you're thinking that you're going to empower the UN into being a world dominant organization that anyone gives a crap about, then you're just wrong. And that's exactly what they did.
It doesn't really matter what the opinion of the people are. Everyone knows that CNN is fake news, yet they have quite a bit of pull in the mainstream media news. That's not the point. That's not an argument.
Obama didn't create the UN resolution. The UN did. He was a lame duck president. The timing of that's
I don't disagree, but again, we're getting off the point.
correct. That's about all you said that was correct. So that was the timing, but they didn't do that. And I'm not endorsing the UN either. I'm saying that what they went after Michael Flynn for doing was saying that he had contacted Russia because they're looking for any kind of Russia connection to smear Donald Trump with. The reason he contacted Russia is because Kushner, on behalf of Netanyahu, had pressured him to do so to get them to change their vote for the UN. Now, whether or not...
Now, this is a good point that Dawson brings up. However, Halsey has already framed his opinion that Netanyahu is just some crazy wahoo. Sorry for the rhyme. I know I'm terrible, but again, Halsey has already established that when you bring up Netanyahu, he can just brush it off saying, oh, I disagree with him, even though he's lying.
No, Obama was just, because the UN had done that, he saw an opportunity to leave Trump with a mess. He may have. But the media is still chastising Michael Flynn, and he lost his job over this because he contacted the Russians. He also contacted everyone else. But it didn't matter that he contacted France, or it didn't matter that they're specifically looking at Russia. And why do you think the left is so anti-Russia?
Because they're told to.
Why do I think the left is so anti-Russia? Because
do you agree that they're anti-Russia, first of all? I mean, that's pretty clear.
I agree that the left is anti-Russia.
Yeah. Okay. Why do you think that is? Because this is sort of a new...
Todd Whalen says, I haven't been keeping up with geopolitics. Did Russia actually interfere with the election? Not in the way that you could use the word interfere. Every single country on Earth has some type of COINTELPRO within another country trying to influence its elections in some way, shape, or form. It's a scapegoat, essentially, that the leftists are using to try and frame Trump's presidency as illegitimate because they're terrified of some of the things that he might have been able to do. It's all based on a lie. And as Dawson points out, it's there are some Israelis involved. We can go into that later.
New sustained campaign, wouldn't you say?
Why do I think that the left is so anti-Russia? Because Putin represents everything that they despise. He is the anti-Marxist.
Not really. It's sort of a toss-up, yes and no. The reason why the left and their puppets are so anti-Russia is because Russia is actually vying against the interest of the international banks, the international Jewry, Israel. They're not on good terms. They are a pretty they're sort of like a Russian first party. No, I'm not endorsing Putin by any means, but the things that he does are in direct opposition. It's not just because he's anti-Marxist or anything like that. So a complete mischaracterization of Putin. And it also opens up an entirely new argument over this whole Russia thing. This is not the point of the debate. Duh. Fucking Halsey's dumb face. Jesus.
Now,
I think a lot of it is Russia's entrance into the war in Syria has a lot to do with it as well. But yeah, there's definitely...
Yep. Yeah, Putin the left supports the war in Syria? Is that what you're saying?
Well, Obama and Hillary Clinton created the war in Syria and funded al-Qaeda, and they all chimed in. Bernie Sanders, Hillary, the entire Democratic nominee, every single one of them said Assad must go and toted the same line.
And as I was saying, Russia has a vested interest against the interest of Israel. So this is why they're being propped up. And the war of Syria is a conflict with, it's a multifaceted conflict. It's not just, okay, here's the good guys, here's the bad guys. You can't say, oh, well, I support this and that for one reason. It's multiple reasons. This is a very heavy global conflict. It's the same thing that's been going on in the Cold War, these proxy wars. You can't say who is good and who is bad. There's too much nuance there to unpack.
So yeah,
Interesting.
The leadership of the left does. There are a lot of attitude. Like Obama got elected supposedly as an anti-war president. That's what his plebs, kind of bestowed upon him. But he was never an anti-war president. He voted for every military action ever when he was a senator.
Point.
And he never, they just sort of said, well, look, he's going to end these wars because they wanted somebody to be anti-Bush. But he wasn't. He was almost exactly the same as George Bush. So what they bestow upon him and what he actually was is very different. But the leftist establishment, all the leaderships in the Senate and the Armed Service Committee and the Secretary of State and the President all supported war in Syria and Assad must go and arming so-called moderate rebels. Trump cut that off last July. He said, we're cutting off all CIA funding to any rebel groups, and then you quickly saw ISIS lose territory because everybody knows the FSA was a conduit to arm the not moderate rebels, the Islamic State. They're arming al-Qaeda.
So then as they had done before. I have a serious question then. If this is what you're saying, is that I've heard you say on your autistic streams on YouTube that is Syria and was all.
Notice how he's personally attacking Dawson as autistic. He says things like, oh, you're a conspiracy theorist. Let me get my popcorn. This is going to be good. Oh, you're autistic. You have autistic live streams. These are not arguments. I know this is blood sports, but it's very easy to see through.
All about Israel and was all about Israel. If you're saying the left are the ones that are perpetuating Syria and wanting war in Syria, they were the most anti-Israel regime that the world has.
Yes, but the leftist leaders like Hillary Clinton are not. That's the key difference. The left is made up entirely of useful idiots, and what they say and what their masters actually believe in, do, and support and gain money from are two totally separate things.
Ever seen in the U.S. John Kerry has been giving the Palestinians advice on how to get by the Trump years until they can come back in and really treat them well. Like Hillary Clinton was not a good Secretary of State to Israel. Obama was a disaster for the entire Middle East, but specifically for Israel. And now you're claiming
that Israel's foreign aid more than any other president.
Yeah, it's true. He did up the foreign aid, but he also went to war, I guess you could call it, started armed conflicts that align just out of pure coincidence, just happened to align with the interest of Israel.
As I've said repeatedly, I wish they would cut that foreign aid. I don't believe that Israel is the beneficiary of that foreign aid. I think that America is, and I would wish they would cut it tomorrow. So I don't believe that Obama did that because it's in the interest of Israel. I think Obama did that because it's in the interest of America. And
how is it possibly? Well, didn't he just say that it wasn't in the interest of America? Maybe I'm hearing things, but it's not in the interest of America to give foreign aid to anyone, no one, until we reach full employment, until we eliminate poverty, until we destroy the welfare state, things like that in the United States. There's no reason to give anyone any foreign aid. I don't understand. Is Halsey supposed to be a conservative? What the fuck?
I think that it's a very bad deal for Israel.
You see the hypocrisy here? When it involves Israel, it's good for America. But all the other things that he says he's against as a conservative, suddenly he's against it. It's so strange.
Because it restricts their arms sales to countries like India, which have 1.2 billion people that would happily buy Kafir jets, Merkava tanks, and Tabor submachine guns, and be worth $3 billion. I mean, that would be a drop in the piss bucket for what Israel could make on their arms sales if they didn't have to give all of their technology to America.
Wow. Okay. So on the one hand, Israel is giving all of its military tech to the United States. On the other hand, they're receiving technology from the United States. Most of the things that have been developed in the Israeli army, as to my knowledge, I could be wrong on this, come from American companies. They've developed very few things on their own, and this funding in particular has gone to their military plan. So without Western powers giving them money and ammunition and tools and various other military equipment, they wouldn't have any of this stuff to export.
For this aid that America gives them, which also has to be spent on American military goods.
75% of it's earmarked on military goods. It's not beneficial for the U.S. or Israel. It's only beneficial for a cabal, a clique of profiteers within.
Ooh, so close, Dawson. You're so close to hitting the target. It is actually, it's beneficial to these companies who are in bed with Israel. They're in bed with war profiteering. They're in bed with the international banks. This sort of war profiteering extends beyond the military-industrial complex. Oh, he's so close.
The MIC, it doesn't expand American interest or Israeli interest.
The Tavor submachine gun, the Iron Dome, the David Sling.
The Tavor is not a submachine gun. It's at most it's a PDW. Sorry, semantics, but it's not a goddamn submachine gun. The Tavor is a battle rifle, or sorry, not a battle rifle. It's a bullpup rifle that could be classified as a PDW. God damn it.
Anti-missile system. These are all systems that are now in America's possession and are now manufactured.
We don't need Tavor rifles. I mean, they're decent bullpup configuration rifles, but our current military doctrine doesn't employ them. Plus, they're too damned expensive. Even with some price negotiation with the U.S. military.
Exclusively in America. That is not profiteering. That is getting
the Iron Dome and the Patriot missile system are overhyped. I mean, before Iron Dome, when they lost 3 people. After Iron Dome, they lost 3 people. A lot of these things are just expensive military misadventures. They're talking about mostly kids throwing rocks and unguided rockets.
Have you ever, unguided rockets. Iranian-made Fajar 26 missiles that have the ability to hit Tel Aviv are just homemade rockets.
Yeah, I mean, they pretty much are. The rocket technology of these third world countries is not exactly the best or most reliable.
I love the bullshit that
Iran is not attacking
when you
Israel.
want to do that. No, Iran sells the military goods to Hamas that they use to attack Israel. Look at the Karin A. Arafat got caught red-handed. Bill Clinton refused to talk to him for.
Disciple of Bugs Bunny says Americans pay private companies to build weapons, then give Israel money to buy those weapons. The taxpayers pay twice and get nothing. Even worse than that, these companies that are building the weapons get tax breaks, so they don't have to pay as much back into the system.
From the Iranian military goods that were sent undercover to Hamas to use against Israel. And
Iran's military tech sucks.
The Iron Dome, I've seen it from my balcony work.
Emotional argument. He's trying to say that, oh, well, I've seen the Iron Dome in action. That's somehow supposed to say that the Iron Dome is some perfect system.
So I have not seen it just on TV. I've never checked out, oh, well, maybe it means this or maybe it means that. I have heard a missile siren go off, looked up in the sides, saw the missile, and then watched another missile come up and hit it. And guess
Yet, watch the argument that Dawson's going to bring up and watch Halsey get absolutely blown the fuck out.
Guess what? It's on my YouTube channel. I recorded it with my cell phone. So if you want to go check it out, go check it out. It works well.
I talked to Ted Postal from MIT, who's an actual rocket scientist.
So now he knows what Dawson is about to blow him out, so he tries to interrupt in order to shut down the conversation. It's not going to work. Dawson, you need to speak up.
You have not seen it work.
So he's saying that because he's seen it, that somehow means that he has more technical expertise than a rocket scientist. See how absolutely retarded this argument is?
I've seen it with my eyes work. So
just because it works most of the time does not mean that it is the one of the best anti-missile defense systems. It's not. It's not even that good. It's completely overpriced and overhyped.
Interviewed rocket scientists about it. Actual rocket scientists from MIT. You can go see Ted Postal's report about the Iron Dome, and it's overhyped. It's, of course, you want to block missiles, and we have like THAAD's the same thing. They have THAAD in South Korea. They have THAAD coming to Japan. It seems like probably. And I actually sat in it. Go ahead.
Damn it, Dawson! Continue with your point. Don't let Jeff interrupt you. This is extremely good. This is one of the best arguments that Dawson had the whole night.
And also, I was just saying, LM $5 US sends us a comment on an earlier point. So, Democrat public officials support AIPAC to gain evangelical support. I mean, come on, dude. And Darius Ashkani brings a comment on the current discussion. He says Trump is trying to start a war with Iran. Fucking talk about this. It seems like an important subject, so I'd like
All
to
right.
hear you both.
So, unfortunately, JF derailed the conversation here. Instead of talking about they started out talking about the misappropriation of funds for military technology, and now they're finally getting into something relevant to the debate at hand when it comes to Israel. But it's now been completely derailed.
Is Trump starting a war with Iran? And what are your current views on the role of Iran in military interventions right now?
You want to go first?
Ryan
Sure.
first.
I think it's mostly rhetoric. I mean, he couldn't even tear up the Iran deal. He just kicked it over to Congress. It's a lot of window dressing. Trump is trying to roll back the military and bring it home. Like, have a strong military so you can never use it, is what he keeps saying. But there seems to be a tug of war within the administration, because there are certainly a lot of people who do want to go to war with Iran in his administration. But
Yeah, and they're all Zionist. Big fucking shocker with that.
Trump is more keen on saying, why, how many places can we be? Now he'll talk it up, because this is, if you read Art of the Deal, it's what he does. He overplays things so that he has room to scale back. But by looking at just the Iran deal alone, and the fact that he's now fighting with his military people, saying he wants to get out of Syria, how long do we got to stay there? He doesn't want to start another war. I think a lot of it's just kind of the paranoia on the internet of everybody thinks the dollar's going to collapse tomorrow, World War III is around the corner, and I don't buy into it.
So Trump has done everything that every president in the past could have done to stop a war in Iran, and in fact, he did it by going after North Korea. Iran does not have the capability to make a nuclear device.
Okay, so first he started out a couple of minutes ago saying how terrifying Iran was with its missile systems, and now he's alluding to the fact that they're completely incompetent, which is exactly what they are. They're completely incompetent.
Test it on a long-range missile and then miniaturize it, which is an essential part of the nuclear development process. North Korea doesn't matter. They can do whatever the hell they want. There's been multiple documented cases of Iranian scientists at North Korean nuclear tests.
Yeah, and it's like two fucking monkeys trying to build a rocket. They can't do it. They're terrible at it. They either lack the intelligence, lack the funding, or lack the materials to do it. Now, North Korea is a bit more of a threat at this point because they're very close to targeting allies in the region, and they actually do have missiles that can fly. I don't know exactly what type of miniaturization they've achieved, but it's certainly an imminent threat. Iran is not. And that certainly doesn't mean that we need to invade them.
Yes. And by taking on North Korea, you are literally cutting off the ability of the mullahs to test intercontinental ballistic missiles and to test nuclear-capable devices to be miniaturized onto those missiles. By dealing with North Korea, there is no chance of a war with Iran.
Maybe
Right,
one super chat right here. John Michael Cornett, $10. Evangelical Christians make up the biggest pro-Israel bloc in the U.S. Support for Israel is stronger among American evangelicals than it is among American Jews. From PRI.
This is definitely true.
So, low IQ intervention from Andy here, completely derailing the conversation again. Also, sort of an irrelevant question, as I touched on earlier about the whole evangelical thing. Yes, evangelicals support Israel. That's the point. It's not exactly in their interest. It's in the interest of the Zionists and the Israeli government.
Yeah, mostly the votes come from evangelicals, and a lot of money comes from Jewish billionaires.
That's
Exactly.
But as far as a voting bloc goes, the evangelicals
Come
don't
on,
have
Andy.
that much money. I mean, a lot of their churches are actually divesting.
That's not exactly true, Dawson. They do have quite a lot of money behind them, but that's beside the entire point.
The Presbyterian Church divested, the Methodist Church divested. But I mean, those are regular churches. The evangelical wing, though,
those aren't evangelicals.
They're not influencing them so much by cash as they are as a large voting bloc, because
that's also, it's like there's so many half truths in this debate. I don't understand. This is such a huge distraction.
You know, they have a closer relationship because of religion with Judaism. They share the same creation story and so on.
Yep.
They believe that Temple on the Mount thing to bring Jesus back, which is actually a bad thing because it also comes with lots of destruction. But that's how the preachers have it. So they, you know, there's a combination of Christian Zionists along with Jewish Zionists, and they have different motivations, but same result.
I mean, I know that John Hagee's organization gave over, like, not them themselves, but through their parishioners, gave over, I think, $1 billion to Israel in just 1 year alone. The evangelical money goes to Israel like crazy. There was actually a big.
So I don't know if Halsey is intentionally blowing himself the fuck out, or if he doesn't realize exactly what he's saying. But yeah, he's just kind of proving my point here. Hey, Malak, how's it going? Thanks for tuning in.
Argument within Israel is whether it was appropriate to take it or not, because of the religious aspect of it. So at this point, they're pretty much in lockstep. There is a strong religious component, not just that they believe in Judaism and Judaism believes in the strength of Christianity. It's more of an end of days prophecy thing. And there's also a passage that says you'll be blessed by Israel.
It's another circle jerking on a point no one disagrees with. It's more filibustering. Get to the actual points. Actually discuss the debate at hand. But no, they're just going to keep whinging on about nothing.
If you bless Israel. So it's a very strong religious component to it.
Yes, we know. Get to the
point.
And
in support of that, John Michael Cornett, $5 US, says, according to a Bloomberg poll, 60% of evangelicals say the U.S. should support Israel, even if its interests diverge with American interests.
Here we go.
So I think that there's a lot more agreement than I expected in this conversation.
Because they're not getting anywhere.
Jeff,
you guys have... Yeah?
I have a question. Ryan, what do you think about the USS Liberty?
Oh, God.
Yeah, I'll talk about the Liberty in a second. There was something I said that maybe because I just said so many things that one of the points was missed, but I wanted to talk about what happened in Apollo. Halsey, are you familiar with NUMEC?
Possibly. I'm not sure what you're talking about.
So now shifty-eyed Halsey over here is going to plead ignorant on this subject. So this is a really good one. Neteru, hey, I saw your comment and I responded. You wanted to talk Egypt. Would you want to hop on the stream right now? There's a link. Follow the link in the live stream description. I can get you on Discord and we can chat.
Yeah, that's how Israel got the bomb.
Okay.
It was,
is this where you're going to go into how Israel killed JFK? I've been waiting for this.
Typical distraction. He's trying to break down Dawson's argument before it even happens. He's trying to set up his frame when it comes to this argument that Dawson's about to make. But it's not going to work because he's wrong.
Hold on.
No,
let me get my snack ready.
Materials and Equipment Corporation.
I had to throw the wrench in there.
What is that? A banana?
Yeah. The banana level of this is about to go through the roof.
This is my move. I eat fruits in debates.
I love fruit. Why can't I eat fruit? I like bananas.
Distraction.
Okay, you can eat fruit. So what about this program that you say this is how Israel acquired the nuclear bomb?
NUMEC stands for the Nuclear Materials and Equipment Corporation. And yes, it does. It is the story of how Israel got its nuclear weapons, because I said earlier in Apollo, there's a $500 million cleanup for residents in Pennsylvania where this place was polluted and irradiated. And if you'd like, I can explain.
Please.
Yes, we want you to fucking explain. Come on, get it over with. It takes, this is like a 10-minute discussion where he could have made his point in a few sentences. So just get to it.
What happened in NUMEC briefly? You had Zalman Shapiro. You may know him. You know Zalman Shapiro.
Get to the point.
Awesome.
The Nautilus program.
Sure.
You don't know what I'm talking about. Well, he helped make nuclear submarines. He's pretty much a genius. And then a man named David Lowenthal, who was more the money guy. Those two set up this thing called NUMEC in Apollo, Pennsylvania. You could think of Shapiro as the brains. He was a metallurgist and chemist, and Lowenthal was the finance. And they created this
Spit it
company
out.
to
Come
produce
on,
highly
you can do
enriched
it.
uranium for the U.S. Navy, but the entire time they were skimming it and sending uranium, highly enriched uranium, to Israel, to Dimona. Now, Israel had a nuclear reactor set up during the Atoms for Peace program under Eisenhower, and it opens up in 1964. I think 64. But the Oak Ridge, which was the U.S.'s first nuclear facility, they noticed a lot of inventory differences coming out of New Mexico where there was missing uranium. Glenn Seaborg did an investigation. He was from the Atomic Energy Agency or Commission. And they found that back in the 60s already 178 kilograms of uranium was missing. And New Mexico actually borrowed $2 million to pay for this missing uranium. And they're wondering, where did it go? And they tried every excuse possible of, how it just got lost in the process. But that is just way too much uranium to cover up. And to put this in perspective for people who aren't sciencephiles, that you need about 10 to 5 kilograms of highly enriched uranium to make a nuclear bomb. And they had over 178 kilograms missing in the 60s, and that number would climb up to over 287 kilograms.
Okay, so I think Dawson should have formulated this better. His rhetoric is very sluggish and drawn out. I don't know exactly how he could reformulate this because I don't have all of his information on hand, but it's so all over the place. Like, make the point. You're going somewhere with this talk, obviously, and when you say something, you have to lead it somewhere, lead it to a conclusion of some kind. Instead, he's just kind of grazing in the field of thought somewhere, trying to explain this event. Just explain it. It's not that hard.
And so there was this mystery of where did it go? But when they finally looked at the founders of NUMEC, all Zionists, by the way, the CIA decided to investigate. So they had John Haddon. He was the CIA station chief in Tel Aviv. He went out around Dimona, and they did some tests on the flora and the surrounding.
Disciple of Bugs Bunny, debate isn't art. It takes more than just knowledge of the issues to be good at it. Not even just debate, but just trying to teach people about historical events. You need to summarize it. You need to take it somewhere. And in this debate in particular, he needs to take his knowledge somewhere. He's just kind of letting it flow, and it's not working.
Environment. And they found something very peculiar, that they were looking for plutonium because the French had helped Israel with a plutonium processing plant in exchange over the Suez crisis. And they didn't find plutonium. They found uranium-235, and the signature was enriched to 97.7%. Now, to make a power plant, you need to enrich uranium to about 3%. To make a nuclear bomb, you want to get it above 90%. Only one nation had it at 97.7%, and that was the U.S., and specifically for the U.S. Navy for nuclear submarines. And so, undoubtedly, this uranium had been diverted from Pennsylvania to Israel in secret and illegally, breaking all kinds of arms export control acts there, through the auspice of Zalman Shapiro, David Lowenthal, and a lot of these arms smugglers, Ernst David Bergman, and these fellows. And the CIA was aware of it. And then you have Richard Helms was told about it by Carl Duckett. He took the findings of the National Intelligence Estimate to Richard Helms. Richard Helms is the DCI for the CIA. That's Director of Central Intelligence. And
yes, we know what a DCI is. Just come on, get to the point.
He took it to Lyndon Johnson, and Lyndon Johnson said not to tell anyone, not even Dean Rusk, who was the Secretary of State.
Disciple says he should have made the point that he's educating Halsey. Yeah, I would have taken this time to say, all right, Halsey, sit down. I'm going to teach you a little something. Sort of demean him, but he didn't do that. So,
or not even McNamara, obviously the Secretary of Defense. So he put the kibosh on it. But because of this fiasco and stealing uranium for a number of years, they finally sell the company over to Atlantic Richfield, and then the Atlantic Richfield sold it to B&W. It's Babcock and Wilcox Company. and they ended operations in 1978. But they got them dead to rights. The CIA found the highly enriched uranium in Israel, and then they were also eyewitnesses of the diversion. And they were putting highly enriched uranium in radiators, which they were sending to Israel. They had this deal with this Israeli, the equivalent of the Israeli Atomic Energy Agency. And
Excella Gione says, that's what I thought this debate would be. So that essentially I thought when Dawson was weighing in a couple of weeks ago, I thought it was going to be more like that. And I know his demeanor, his personality is pretty sullen and kind of sluggish, but what was this? Was he not prepared? Was he strung out? Did he have like a hangover or something? I don't understand. He just bring the facts and steer the conversation in a certain direction. It really isn't that hard, to be honest.
you can send radiators legally.
We're now at 1 hour, 18 minutes and 37 seconds. It has taken Dawson, what, 4 minutes to get to this point? And he still hasn't gotten to the conclusion.
But you're not supposed to pack them with highly enriched uranium. And it's very dangerous as well. But this was going on. It's witnessed on the docks in New York. And so Israel was just openly stealing uranium from the United States. CIA knew. The president was told. The FBI was informed. But Johnson didn't want to move on it. And, it quietly changes hands. But now the result is, okay, Israel has nuclear weapons. Prior to that, the Kennedys were trying to inspect Dimona because they already suspected it. That's why the CIA went there before they even knew about New Mech. But ever since Kennedy, they've never been inspected. Israel's never allowed inspections of Dimona. It's kind of an open secret that they have nuclear weapons. There have been U.S. congressmen that have mentioned it offhand, hundreds of nuclear warheads. But they're not signed to the Non-Proliferation Treaty, as other nuclear powers are, and they stole the technology and physical material from the United States.
Okay, that last sentence or two should have been his opening line when it came to this argument, this particular point that he's trying to make, that Israel stole nuclear technology from the United States under the guise of an NGO, then went on to use it to develop nuclear technology. They're not a part of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, therefore they shouldn't really have it, and they had to steal it to get it. That should have been his point from the very get-go.
And now people in Pennsylvania are left with this. The Army Corps of Engineers estimated over $450 million to clean up the.
Neteru, it's in the. Here, I'll get you the link here. 1 second. Sorry, guys. I'm talking to someone in chat. If anyone out there watching wants to join the show, you can follow this link. Squirt, I'm on there right now. You can send me a message. Let's get back to this real quick.
Mess. And so this is definitely not in U.S. interest. Israel secretly stole and created nuclear weapons against U.S. interests. Well, with the exception of Lyndon Johnson. Through the New Mech scandal. And there's a good book on that called Divert by Grant Smith.
Should have brought that up much earlier instead of putting it at the end.
And there's another one written by Roger Madsen called Stealing the Atomic Bomb, Out Denial and Deception, Armed Israel.
And that's the only good part about the stream is that Dawson is bringing up these sources for people to look at. He's knowledgeable, but he can't present it in any coherent way.
And that was an issue that I just said about the cleanup costs without explaining the story. So I thought.
So now he's trying to wrap it in a circle, going back to the whole cleanup thing, but it's just not a good way to present the argument.
Give the background on it. It's a huge ordeal to steal nuclear weapons from a sovereign state. You think that would be kind of front page news, but very few people are aware of what happened at all. And why do you think that is? The media is not interested in the story of nuclear weapons being stolen from the United States. It should show the power of the MIC and the lobby to cover up something.
Well, it's not just the MIC, but it's other lobbyist groups. Netero, I don't have a Discord account. Let's see. Is there a way I can contact you with the Hangouts link? Do you have a way to get on Google Hangouts?
Things are huge.
Halsey, do you agree with this reading? First, with the factual description that the nuclear bomb was stolen to the U.S., and then on the lobby controlling the information on that?
I don't know about the lobby controlling the information.
So now he's going to shift the debate kind of to the lobby side.
It's never been a very well kept secret that nuclear that Israel has a nuclear device.
So now he agrees that nuclear has a weapon, but I don't know if he's going to agree that it was stolen.
And that they have up to 200 of them at this point. Their official policy is ambiguity. But I mean, they have nuclear submarines that are capable of launching Trident missiles from there with nuclear weapon tips. So I don't doubt that they have it. And if it was given to them by someone in Pennsylvania, I mean, I don't understand how that's connected to there's a mess out there and therefore it needs to be cleaned up. One has nothing to do with the other, and he knows that. I mean,
well, no, the mess was to cover up. I'll explain better.
No,
he even knows that he needs to explain this better. Neteru, I can just go to Google Hangouts and wait for you to send me an invite. Like I said, is there a way I can contact you? Do you want me to? Do you have an email address that you want to post, and I can email you the link? Or you can. I guess you can follow me on Google Plus. I think you can. I can add you directly to the stream that way.
Yeah, the reason for the mess.
Wait a minute.
Go ahead.
What he's overlooking is that, number one, at the time that Israel developed the nuclear bomb, the reason they did it was because they were constantly being pawned off as a proxy war with Russia between the.
Okay, so now again, this goes back to his pathology when it comes to Israel. He is defending the action of stealing nuclear material from the United States and also leaving the U.S. taxpayer to clean up the mess. So he's just justifying his views.
The U.S. and Russia, and they knew that, unlike Turkey, that Kennedy and probably even Johnson, who was a pretty sympathetic person to Israel, that no one was going to station Jupiter missiles in Israel, and Israel cannot absorb a nuclear strike. There's no way. It's the size of New Jersey. So
that means that they should be able to freely steal anything they want from the United States, right? They shouldn't have to go through the legal processes every other country. Interesting.
If it was done clandestinely, if it was done underhandedly, I mean, that sucks, I guess. I mean,
his entire argument is that sucks. Great argument.
I don't know how I'm supposed to answer for something done in the 50s.
And now he's going to say that because it happened a long time ago, he can't really talk on it, of course.
But at the same time, I'm glad they have the nuclear triad. I think that them being nuclear armed has stopped many Middle Eastern wars, just like it stopped in the Cold War, us actually having a real war with China and Russia, with Russia, and later on.
And that's not the argument that's being made.
With China. So I thank you. Is that a good answer?
The reason for the mess is when they have so much missing uranium, they have to explain where did it go. And it was a way to stall. It was very hard to go inspect nuclear waste and determine, how much is here, how much is over there. And some of it was being spilled, or they just didn't care about the environment and the rush to get as much uranium to Israel as possible. Mm-hmm. But it kind of serves as cover for at least portion of that. It makes me say, well, look how polluted it is. Maybe we were just really bad and lost some of it in the environment. But the degree, the level that was missing, it just could not be explained that way. Plus, they found it later in Israel anyway. Yes, it was done clandestinely. And the other point is, then why not, sign the non-proliferation treaty and allow inspections? Because if not, that opens up black markets to sell this junk if you're not having inspections. And whether it's polonium, which was found in the UK, or going into Chechnya or whatever, there are always questions of where this is coming from, and it could be cleared up very fast if they would allow inspections and just admit what the whole world knows, that they have nuclear weapons. And yes, they stole them from the United States. But what I'm interested in is, you could say, well, they should have nukes, and it's good they have nukes because it's a deterrent. That's not my issue. My issue is that they stole them from the United States, and that the press has just been pretty much dead silent on that.
That's exactly right.
Not so much the newspapers, but the televised press. And I find that interesting. Is to me, that shows the power of the relationship, especially between the LBJ administration, who did not even want to tell the Secretary of State or Secretary of Defense about what the CIA had found. And that, because I got asked about the Liberty, and that's going to go back to Johnson. So I just wanted to establish how tight he was with the Israelis.
Not the best way, if we're talking about Johnson in Israel, not the best argument you could have had to explain that relationship. Just saying.
State that he was helping them cover up stealing nuclear material from America, which America could have just sold to them. but that wasn't in the public.
Right. And as I said before, Dawson should have clarified that much earlier in his opening statement when it came to this particular topic, but he didn't.
Interest, and it would have definitely caused a reaction from Russia doing the same thing and caused a proliferation, and we were supposed to be doing the opposite. So maybe they're looking away on purpose. What, maybe they wanted them to have the bomb and couldn't sell it to them. They have lots of possible, I mean, it's all speculation, reasons why they let them steal it. But the CIA certainly wasn't happy about it. That's why they did investigations about it. The Justice Department wasn't happy about it, but the president pretty much squashed it.
All right. Before we move to the USS Liberty, I'd read a few super chats. Saltwater, $20 Canadian, says,
All right, sorry about that. So we're really coming to the end of this debate. I know we're only like halfway through the video, but there's not a whole lot more I can say unless I respond to their particular arguments. But that's about it. I mean, we see very clearly Halsey's debate tactics, and that Dawson was not prepared for this in any way, shape, or form. Oh, there we go. Welcome to the show, Nateru.
Yeah, no problem.
I'm going to stop screen sharing there. So what do you want to talk about?
I'm sorry, I didn't catch all that because I was hearing your voice on the other screen from your actual video.
Gotcha. What is it that you wanted to talk about? Egypt?
Oh yeah, I wanted to. So just to clarify, I had heard that you were going to be doing a debate with Radio 1 on Andy Worski's channel sometime in the near future.
Can I announce that real quick for everybody?
Oh yeah, go ahead.
So Radio 1 and the Real Hamitic Man or something, the Real Hamite, whatever. Those two want to debate me, and we've set up a tentative debate of April 15th. It's a Sunday.
Okay. Just so you're aware, I am the Hamite. That's my other account, but I have two. Yeah. So I just wanted to discuss Egypt with you because I understand that I don't know if you're one of the, I guess I would call you a skeptic when it comes to whether or not the ancient Egyptians were black or white, and I kind of wanted to just get your viewpoint on what you think the race of the Egyptians actually was.
Right. Well, I mean, I guess I could. I hate to lay out my entire argument early. It's more of a presentation than anything, because I know this debate relies heavily on imagery for the most part. But really, what I was getting at when I first even talked to Radio was that I want his thesis to hold true if he's got a good enough amount of evidence behind it. So I was trying to help him come up with a way that would be better in presenting this, because that debate with Weibo was a shit show, and I was trying to kind of push the conversation along. Now, as far as my understanding of the question of, okay, who are the original native Egyptians, there's only a couple ways I can understand it, and one of them, and this breaks down into two particular I guess you could call it two particular arguments. One of them is the scientific one, and the other one is the historiological one. So I was going to break it down in two different ways. No, but I want to hear what your thesis is. You know, the whole reason why I'm reaching out like this is because I want to actually hear it. I'm tired of having people like Weibo kind of derail the conversation the entire time. So I actually want to hear what the thesis is on this, because I just don't know. I'm not an Egyptologist or anything like that.
Right. Well, I guess I can kind of lay out my thesis for you. So basically, where the angle that I come from, because I'm sort of, I'm sort of tired of everyone arguing from the angle of just genetics, when there are other ways to, I guess, approach the ancient Egyptian culture, race, and civilization. So usually where I come at it from is, while people are usually quick to argue genetics and talk about haplogroups and things like that, I try to come from more of a behavioral, psychological, sociological, and cultural anthropological angle, rather than just taking the genetic route all the time, which is what most people are used to hearing.
Exactly.
So it's like, where I'm coming from is, if we're going to, you don't have to just solely rely on genetics to understand that the ancient Egyptians were Black Africans. If you study their behavior, you will know that they were Black Africans, as opposed to the, I guess, more popular idea or conclusion that people come to is that, okay, these people were Caucasians from the Middle East, even though the anthropological and archaeological evidence does not point in that direction. It actually points toward sub-Saharan Africa. And there are a variety of different ways, or there are multiple ways in which you can get into knowing that. So it depends on, if you want to discuss their material culture, if you actually want to discuss their beliefs, a lot of which are rooted in ancestral worship and nature worship, then those are two ways that I would say you could probably begin learning about the African roots of the ancient Egyptians.
Right. And when you say that they're Black Africans, you mean like the typical people think of like sub-Saharan Africans with a particular phenotype, right? With dark skin and a protruding jawline and a wide nose, things like that.
Well, again, there's my thing is, again, I only recognize the original 19th or 20th century racial classifications, which are the Caucasian race, the Negroid race, and then the Mongoloid race. So in the traditional sense, yes, I mean, the Egyptians were members of the Negroid race, or they would be classified as a Negroid. There is variation, however, though, in sub-Saharan Africa, but I think a lot of the phenotype of East Africans has been exaggerated a lot. The variation between Africans is very slight. And there's been a lot of...
heard the opposite from some of these Afrocentrists. In particular, radio. I heard the opposite.
Yeah, and again, I'm not exactly sure what radio's, and I don't want to speak for him. I don't know exactly what his idea or, exactly his thesis is regarding African diversity. But for me, I acknowledge that African diversity exists. For me, it's only slight variation. It's not as if you have a completely distinct race living in one part of the continent that looks completely different from the rest of the people that live in the other parts or other regions of the continent of Africa. I mean, if there's a way I can screen share, I could show you an example.
If you go over to the left side, there's a little green arrow, or it's a white arrow and a green monitor. You can click on that screen share.
Okay, gotcha.
There we go. Nope. Yeah, don't share the Hangout.
Okay. Yeah. No worries. Give me a second here.
I want to change tabs.
Okay. Can you see what's on my screen?
Yeah, I can see it. This whole stream can see it. So.
Yeah. Again, I understand that images alone are not total proof. But just to kind of give you an idea of where I'm coming from, because I noticed that when a lot of people talk about the artwork of the ancient Egyptians, it's either they're very selective about the kind of artwork that they show, or they don't actually show real authentic ancient Egyptian artwork. And that's normally what I have a problem with. But this is actually, can you see what I have up here?
I can see it.
Okay, yeah. So this is an actual Egyptian statue from the 11th dynasty. So yeah, like you said, when I'm talking about ancient Egyptians, I am talking about a people that have a African phenotype in the traditional sense. And I'm not exactly sure what you would make of the statue here, but This is going back at least 4,000 years.
Right, it's the 11th dynasty, right? So the only issue I have with some artwork, and I pointed this out in the video, is that some of it can be up to artist's interpretation, and this is the issue a lot with history accounts. So one of the historians that radio uses is a person by the name of Siculus, and he uses a particular account of the African peoples, the Egyptian peoples. But even within that source, it says that it was fabricated, that it's the oldest version of fake news I've ever heard, that the author fabricated it in order to please his readers. So some of this artwork, it's very hard to tell exactly why or when it was made. Now, there are some things like this. I don't know the history behind the statue. If you do, please let me know. But I understand it's a funerary statue. It's made of wood.
It's made out of, well, just says here on the website, this is actually the Gulbenkian Museum website. It says it's from the Middle Kingdom, 11th dynasty, and it kind of just gives you a description about what the statue is about. But the actual statue itself was found in a mastaba behind a well, the ancient Egyptians, the mastabas, they used to place these actual statues inside of them, which were called kas, and that's where the Egyptians actually would go to take offerings and things like that to sort of propitiate the spirit of the dead. Beliefs like. Do
you agree that the Egyptians sort of presented their funerary statues in a different way than they do for their living statues? Like if you have many interpretations of Osiris, and you look at his living artworks, and then you look at his post death and reincarnation, or not reincarnation, but when they fused him back together, that he's interpreted in a different way. Because a lot of these Ka statues, especially this is something that radio does quite frequently, is that they'll take a statue that is either made out of a certain material that makes it so that the color of the statue turns dark brown like that, or he will use a painted statue that is a representation of someone who has died. And the way that they
I see what you're saying. Okay, yeah.
Make those is that they would paint the skin of those statues black because it represents death, because people's skin turns black when they die. So some of these statues using are not legitimate.
Right. Okay, and so to answer your question about that, I do notice I've looked at a lot of Egyptian artwork. I'm talking back from 5th dynasty all the way to the New Kingdom. So I have a fairly good eye when it comes to looking at Egyptian artwork, being able to distinguish from their artistic, when it relates to their spirituality versus when it relates to, or when it has to do with their actual depictions of themselves in daily life. And what the common pattern that I notice is, for example, 5th dynasty, is that the Egyptians always depict themselves as they always depict themselves when it comes to realistic depictions of themselves. They always depict themselves this way. The men are always painted and depicted red, and this is consistent for at least almost 3,000 years, up until you get to at least the late period, and that's when you start to notice changes in their depictions. A lot of it having to do with the fact that there was I believe, demographic shift or change that was happening in the late period, and so
right before the Ptolemaic and Roman periods, like the 26. Okay, yeah. See, I don't. This is where me and someone like Weibo would disagree. She's not very clear in outlining her arguments, but essentially, what I want to argue for is the first and the proto-dynastic period up until the 25th, and I'm not interested in too many things past that because there was an influx of foreigners. You might want to change tabs, by the way. Don't go back to the Hangout tab.
Oh, okay. I'm gonna close that.
Yeah,
gotcha.
Yeah, well, the tab you're on right now is showing people the link, so you got to switch.
Okay. Sorry. Oh.
So, So.
Is that better? Is that good now?
No. Hold on. Go up and click back on the funerary statue tab. Yeah. Stay on that because you go back to the Hangout tab. Yeah. Yep. Nope. Go back.
Oh, right there. This one.
Yeah, just stay on something like that. So because
Okay.
when you're sharing your screen, you're sharing the invite link as well.
Oh, I see. Okay, gotcha. Sorry, my bad.
No, it's fine. But so there are two arguments that kind of interplay, like I said, the genetic and the historiological one. So the interpretations that I see, yeah, there is a wide range of colors that the Egyptians kind of present themselves as over time. And I think the earliest artwork I could find that was similar to this was like the 4th or 5th dynasty. Most of the things before that, you have very crude, well, not crude, but it's usually the paint or pigment hasn't been preserved, or it's very heavily damaged or something like that. But as far as like how far back we can go to determine how the Egyptians presented themselves is kind of limited.
Right. And so for me, the farthest I've been able to go back and look at their artwork is to the 5th dynasty. So
that's why the genetic argument is so important when you're looking past that, because there is a way of determining patrilineal Y DNA origins that's consistent with all of these groups. So you can determine where exactly those groups or those haplogroups came from based on the origins of it. So essentially, as I understand it, there you have 3 distinct groups within Africa prior to the scramble for Africa in the 19th century or whatever. You have the sub-Saharan Africans, which differentiate between East and West, and then you have North Africans. And North Africans differ; they're very distinct from the rest of the population. And if you're looking at between the civilizations, you have, I believe it's near Senegal, where you get a mix, like a gradient of people between North and sub-Saharan Africans, and they present themselves phenotypically as sort of a mix between the two. And if you're looking at the point between,
okay, so you just sorry, go ahead.
You're looking at a differentiation between Nubians and Egyptians, where they've had this strong border. If you take their Y DNA origins, they're distinct from one another. So when you look at the genetic origins of what you might consider the native Egyptians, it spans back to a Neolithic European origin, as do all North Africans. Okay. And you can actually tell exactly when sub-Saharan African DNA was mixed into the Egyptian population, North African population as a whole, and that was during the Roman conquest.
Okay, I see what you're saying. So my thing is, okay, I have a bit of I guess I have certain suppositions when it comes to the theory, anything that is associated with the theory of evolution, because my thing is, and I have some anthropological background and experience, but my thing is, and I did try to take the most objective approach to studying evolution. But for me, when you're going back and you're saying things like there was Neolithic populations that came to Africa, for me, that is kind of tied into the theory of evolution. And so,
well, not really. You can prove it because there's archaeological evidence that Neolithic Arabs, or not Arabs, not the Arabs we know today, but the Proto-Arabic people who have a certain haplogroup markers appear within the native Egyptian population. And the same thing can be said for the U haplogroup that North Africans distinctly have within them. And the U haplogroup stems only from the R haplogroup, which is only found in European populations. So you would have to explain how exactly this North African population, which is distinct from these other groups, how they managed to obtain this U haplogroup, and in particular the U1A or U6A haplogroup that's distinct to North Africa. So there would appear to be some type of transition between the two. Now, if you're looking at the archaeological record, you have to look at the agricultural revolution that happened in the Middle East and how it transitioned into North Africa. And there's evidence to show that the stock keeping that the Neolithic Arabs had was brought into the Nile River Valley, and then from there they intermixed. So as far as like modern classifications of race are concerned, you pretty much throw them out because the native Egyptian, quote unquote, doesn't really fall into any of these categories. They're a distinct admixture of Neolithic European and Neolithic Middle Easterner or Levantine or Assyrian. might say Phoenician as well. They all fit into that genetic group. And so that's where I'm coming from. I'm not going to say that they're they're like, Nords or something like that, but they're also not Arabic. They're a distinct mixture of the two that sort of popped up because of where they're situated in the Middle East.
Okay, so no, and I follow exactly what you're saying. So just to be clear, like you said, these proto Arabic peoples, they wouldn't have looked, or they're not like the Arabic people we're thinking of today. But I don't know if you can see this photo I have up.
You're not screen sharing anymore.
Oh, I'm not screen sharing. Hold on, let me see. So because I want to get your opinion on this right here. Shoot, give me a second.
There you go.
Okay. All right. So you see this photo right here?
Yep.
Now, would you say that at least from the side that you're arguing, would you say that the Egyptians the proto-Egyptians or proto-North Africans looked something like this man right here?
Not really. He's got some distinct cranial features that are unique to modern Arabs. I would say it might be kind of hard to tell.
Okay.
Maybe I can get some more pictures of him, but something maybe similar to that.
Okay.
As well. All of the as far as I know, even the civilian burial grounds, they found evidence of specific phenotypes, which are slightly different from the one that you just showed me.
Okay. Gotcha. Hold on. All right. So you can see this right here, right?
Yep, I can see it.
Okay, so this is an image of Amos Sapir. I believe he was a prince of the 17th dynasty. This is what an ancient Egyptian from the at least again this gives us an idea of what a 17th dynasty Egyptian looked like. And I believe this actual statue is in the Louvre Museum in France. And so, I mean, if it was just solely just based off of looking at the face and making a judgment, I would say that based on what I'm looking at here, I see someone that looks sub-Saharan African. I don't see anybody that looks like someone from the Middle East or from the Mediterranean.
Right. You have to understand that how the Egyptians were phenotypically is very much different from any other modern group. There's very few native Egyptians left that haven't been admixed into the Arab or sub-Saharan African population because of the conquests of their nation. And also, I would have to ask about the particulars of this statue, because is that native hair or is that a wig? Because that style of wig is very common in the Egyptian population. So I don't know if you're excluding hair from this or not. I would also come into question what the artistic interpretation of that is. Do we have any other sources to corroborate that that's how that person looked?
As far as sources, I can't say that I have any with me as regarding Amos, but to kind of explain the hair, because this is where I'm saying you're kind of getting into more of a cultural anthropological look into ancient Egyptian behavior and life. And
these are sorry if I'm wrong here. These are East Africans, the Afar?
Yes, the Afar pretty strongly, I mean, as far as their phenotype and their appearance, they have a very they are a Cushitic speaking, as far as linguistics goes, they are Cushitic speaking East Africans. But as far as their actual phenotype,
do you know what the genetic grouping of these people are? Because I actually looked into this.
Genetic grouping. I don't know the genetic grouping, but I'd be interested in, while I'm searching for this photo, I'd be interested in hearing about it.
So the East Africans are unique because of their close approximation to the Middle East. So they actually share half of their genetic code with Middle Easterners, not necessarily Arabics, but it's pretty close. So if I was to show you a haplogroup breakdown map of Africa, you would see 3 distinct groups. In fact, you could almost say that the Egyptians are a 4th distinct group because they're so heavily admixed with all of these different groups based on their location. So these East Africans, yeah, they did very commonly look like that, yeah.
Right, and so okay, so I'm kind of doing a side by side comparison here of Amos and this Afar man, and I don't know if you what do you make of it exactly?
It's very similar, yeah. That's why I want, like, if I'm not gonna deny that there's similarities between these two, but if we're going to make an absolutist conclusion on these, I would want a little bit more from this person, the statue. I mean, so what year or dynasty is that statue from?
It's from the 17th dynasty.
17th.
So
okay.
as far as actual date chronology, I'm a little mixed up on that, but I know it's for sure from the 17th dynasty, and you can find it the same exact photo on Wikimedia.
That would also call into question how far away is an actual native Egyptian person from this person in particular, because I'm not particularly concerned with arguing about the later periods where there was lots of admixture with other groups. I'm more concerned with the origins of the Egyptian civilization in and of itself, the sort of proto-dynastic period up until the 4th and 5th dynasty, when they really started engaging in conflict with these other groups like the Nubians, the East Africans, the Libyans, which were other North Africans, and the Levantines and Assyrians. So,
okay, and you made an interesting point just now. So I noticed I've watched a lot of videos, different kind of stuff on YouTube, and just kind of getting to understand people's arguments. And a lot of people would say that the Egyptians distinguished themselves based on their features from the Nubians in the south. But excuse me. Are you still there, Mimir? Hello?
Yeah, sorry, I was muting myself. What happened?
Oh, okay. Sorry. A lot of people would say that the Egyptians had distinguished themselves from the Nubians in the south. And from what I can clearly see, the difference between an Egyptian and the difference between a Nubian was simply something like this. You had, again, the Egyptians had more of a look like the Afar. I mean, the hairstyles all throughout the from the Old Kingdom all the way to the New Kingdom are exactly the same. And again, that's getting into their customs, and again, behavior is where I focus a lot of my attention. And then the difference between, and then a Nubian person would look like someone like this from South Sudan, and you can see that there's a clear distinction. It's not like the I think exaggerated claims that are made where someone is saying that an ancient Egyptian looked like a picture of the Arab guy I showed you earlier, who is actually a modern day Egyptian musician. The difference between an ancient Egyptian was this Afar man and this Dinka, and that's but both of them are, as far as I'm concerned, they both belong to the Negroid race. They're just, their appearance differs slightly, and that's kind of the only thing.
Right. So I've seen a couple of these artworks, in particular the war stories between the Upper Egyptian Empire and their wars against the Nubians, and it would appear that when they make artistic renditions of themselves, that they're not even close to what you might consider a sub-Saharan African, or even an East African for that matter. They seem to be completely distinguished. And again, all of this art is kind of up for the interpretation of the artist to make. So to make an absolutist claim on this based off of artwork is kind of, well, it's outside the realm of objective truth. And I'm not going to try and make an objective truth claim, but it seems like there's more evidence to the contrary than anything else.
And okay, I hear what you're saying. And it's again, my whole position is not just totally based on artwork. Actually, this guy right here, his name is E.A. Wallace Budge. I have two of his books. He published in basically at the beginning of the 20th century, 1911. And they're called Osiris and the Egyptian Resurrection, and it's 2 volumes, part 1 and part 2. I've read the first volume. I'm about midway through the second volume, but E.A. Wallace Budge, who's actually was a English Egyptologist, when he published those 2 books in 1911, he was basically clear on that the evidence was there that the ancient Egyptians were in fact, and he says it throughout the entirety of the first volume. And I understand you probably have to read it, and if you would be interested in doing that just to fact check me, you absolutely should. I would recommend it. But he pretty much says throughout the entirety of the book that the ancient Egyptians are related to the peoples of not only Sudan, but the entire continent of Africa. Now, in his day, the vast majority of European scholars, of course, didn't agree with him because they didn't want to have an African origin for the ancient Egyptian civilization. And that's when you get into another, I guess you could say, the Eurocentric side of the argument, which I believe started with Giuseppe Sergi, who was an Italian anthropologist.
The only question I would have is that what in particular is he looking at? What time period of Egypt? When he says it's related to the Africans.
Well, if I can remember correctly, Budge says that from the Old Kingdom all the way down to the New Kingdom. And this is also where it kind of corroborates with the archaeological evidence from Samuel Morton's time. Because Samuel Morton, he was an American anthropologist who had actually looked at ancient Egyptian skulls and said, okay, I noticed that based on the uniformity of their skull shape, that there was a genetic continuity throughout ancient Egypt. So this is where I had a problem with Weibo when she was debating Ridio, because she was making absurd claims that, there was all this diversity in ancient Egypt. And that's not true, because
some time periods after like the conquest, maybe, but it's kind of up in the air. There's not a whole lot of evidence as to what the general population was outside of written history and some paintings, but I think she tries to make an absolutist claim as well, and she can't substantiate it very well.
Right. So going back to the time of the Old Kingdom, which was one of the pharaohs that he mentions is Djed Isesi Kare. Djed Isesi Kare had sent one of his, and I forget the actual hieroglyphic name for ancient Egyptian explorers, but he had sent a ancient Egyptian explorer into sub-Saharan Africa, to the land of Punt, where the ancient Egyptians said to have actually originated from. And one of the ways that the land of Punt is actually in sub-Saharan Africa is because the Egyptians would go and get pygmies. They would basically catch them and bring them back to Egypt. And pygmies were sort of revered in ancient Egypt. I wouldn't say worshipped, but they were definitely revered. Because to the point where pharaohs would actually have them buried with them, because they wanted to have these pygmies go with them into the afterlife. So the Egyptians did have very close relationship and ties as far as trade and as far as, I'm sure, intermarriage with sub-Saharan Africans. That's not to say.
Well, I mean, as far as genetic flow between the two groups, there is enough evidence to suggest that there was hardly any, if at all, until the Roman conquest, in which they opened up the borders to non-Egyptians. Even during the Ptolemaic period and the Assyrian conquest and the Hittite wars, they kept Egypt's borders closed to Nubians. So when you have this Roman expansion where they sort of open up the borders and start conquesting other groups as well, and they all kind of put them under the Roman banner, you can distinctly see the beginnings of the admixture of sub-Saharan Africans. And that's the only thing I would say to that, is that I don't really know too much about the intermarriage between the two, but if you're looking purely from the genetic side of things, it doesn't seem to hold true that they were intermixing with those people south of their borders. Now, as far as mixing east-west, that's very common. That's essentially how they ended up belonging to multiple different haplogroups at once. They were sort of a mixed race.
And see, again, that's kind of because what you're saying, again, when I mentioned Samuel Morton and him saying that the skulls that he looked at, there's a clear continuity from the Old Kingdom down to the New Kingdom. I think you also had said earlier that the mixing didn't actually happen until the really late period in Egyptian history. So the Egyptians did belong. So prior to the late period, the Egyptians did belong to or originate from a single stock, and that stock, again, if we're going to acknowledge that there are only three races, which I only acknowledge that there are three races. There's Caucasian, there's Negroid, and there's Mongoloid. Okay, the Egyptians obviously were not Mongoloid because, the East Asian race is geographically too far to be in Africa. Me personally, as far as them being Caucasian, when you get into ethnology and using ethnographic literature to compare it to ancient Egyptian, their ideas, their beliefs, their customs, you don't really see anything that they share in common with peoples from the Mediterranean or the Near East. You see things that
not a later period, yeah. But the point is that they share a common lineage with Europeans that can only come from a similar origin. So when you're talking about racial groupings, I think it's important to distinguish that our modern conceptions of race, and that goes back to the earliest racial groupings in the 19th century, it doesn't really apply to the Egyptians, what we call native Egyptians, because there's many different ethnic groups within regions that don't really fall along the lines of any one particular racial group. They kind of fall in between them because they have origins from many different places. So I think that trying to break them down into a specific racial group is kind of a misnomer. So if you're trying to say that they're Negroid, well, you could, sure, but then you would have to distinguish them from the rest of the Negroid people, and they don't really share that many genetic markers with other sub-Saharan Africans. Culture is one thing. They've been so secluded from the European and Middle Eastern cultures. They're very close to African cultures, which is probably why they took on so many of these customs. But their origins can only come from this similar grouping.
Right. And so, okay, and I understand that you mentioned earlier that artwork is kind of open to anybody's interpretation, and so kind of dealing with, again, aspects of their culture and their customs, beliefs. So this is an image from the 2nd millennium BC, an Egyptian harp player. Because my thing is, I think that the whole saying that we can't actually place the Egyptians into a racial category is, I think it's just a way to dodge, admitting that the ancient Egyptians were actually sub-Saharan Africans, or they were closely related to peoples of sub-Saharan Africa. Because again, I'm not seeing anything like what I'm seeing here and what I'm seeing here of this man from Chad who's playing what's called a B-ram. And the harp that he's actually playing looks exactly like the harps that you find in ancient Egyptian tombs and that you see in ancient Egyptian artwork. I'm not seeing any of that in the Mediterranean or in the Near East. Now, what's strange to me is that the Egyptian culture, you could argue diffusion and say that, okay, well, maybe Egyptian influence went south, but there's really limited archaeological evidence to prove that.
Oh, no. I was saying that essentially they're closer culturally and religiously to African cultures because they're so close. But as far as the origins of their species, I guess if you want to call it like that, it has to be from some similar progenitor to some racial groups that we understand today. So, and also on the topic of some similar cultures, if you look at the Minoan artwork, it's very similar to ancient Egyptian artwork as well. They even depict some of the same skin tones.
No doubt.
Yeah, I'll bring that up in the debate. It seems like that region has a particular way of depicting themselves, and that there's no real conclusive way of saying if they were one or the other. I mean,
Well, for me, so you did mention you did mention the Minoans right now, which I believe they had either, me personally, and even Giuseppe Sergi, I have his book. He says that he believed that the Minoans may have actually come from, or sorry, I don't know if it was the Minoans or the Etruscans, but he says that I think he said the Etruscans, which I believe are related to the Minoans, actually came from the Phoenicians. But they could have also been from Libya, or they could have been from the Egyptians as well. And there's not very
their clines and principal compositions place them with Mediterranean Europeans.
Right, Mediterranean Europeans. Okay, and so that's again another great point you just brought up. You have this image here. This is one of the only images that I know of any ancient depictions of Canaanites. He does look similar to what you'd see in the artwork of ancient Egypt as far as his skin complexion. And again, the whole thing about Mediterranean people, Italians, Greeks, Spanish, it's like, okay, if we were going to look for a modern day equivalent to, let's say, an ancient race like the Egyptians, I'm not seeing, based on what I've looked at just from studying different groups in the Mediterranean, whether it be the Basque, whether it be just Italian peoples themselves, which can be kind of, I guess you could say, diverse in their appearance. They can be very pale, like most Northern Europeans, the further you go toward the Alps, or they can be, kind of brown as you go further south in Italy. But I'm not saying that any of those people look or resemble anything like, or look anything like an ancient Egyptian. The closest phenotype we get to an ancient Egyptian, if we were going to take a modern group and compare to the ancient Egyptians based on how they represent themselves in their artwork, the closest you come to is people that live in sub-Saharan Africa. And that's kind of why Giuseppe Sergi himself argued that the people from the Mediterranean originated from Africa. They came from a stock which he called the Hamites. Now, the Hamites included the Somalis, Maasai, the Afar, the Oromo.
Well, the issue with that is that that's not possible because they share a different genetic origin. It's just not possible unless there was somehow the entirety of sub-Saharan Africa was wiped out and replaced with a different race. Their origins that we can trace back through the Y DNA, or sorry, Y chromosome. It just doesn't work. There's no possible way that they could have originated in Africa. The only possible way that you can get how the North Africans came to be is some origin within Southern Europe. And even these Neolithic European groups are different from modern day Europeans. They don't possess many of the traits or genetic markers of modern day Europeans. They would actually cluster outside of someone that lives in France or Germany or something like that. And many of them were dispersed throughout the Mediterranean area and south of that into North Africa.
Okay, so I have a question for you then. Again, because I've looked into a lot on when it comes to cultural anthropology. I've studied a lot on the ancient Egyptians, and just really getting to familiarize myself with their culture and their beliefs, that's kind of a route that most people I find don't really travel down. They usually, again, the way that they approach ancient Egypt is, okay, we're going to argue solely from the basis of genetics instead of actually learning about the customs and beliefs of these people. Because when I normally ask people, can you actually tell me something about ancient Egyptian culture? They can't answer. Or the way that they see ancient Egyptian culture is through a modern lens, or through the lens of modern Arabic Islamic culture, which has nothing to do with ancient Egypt. So now when I'm asking, so my question to you is, if the Egyptians were more, I guess you could say, from looking at it psychologically or behaviorally, if the Egyptians were more, if they behaved more like sub-Saharan Africans, why would they have been racially distinct, or why would they have been biologically distinct from sub-Saharan Africans, yet they chose to take on there's a lot of traits, culturally speaking, that they share in common with sub-Saharan Africans and not with people from the Mediterranean or the Near East? To me,
Gotcha.
that just doesn't make sense.
I touched on this earlier. I'm speaking exclusively about the origins of this particular, let's say, ethnic group. for lack of a better term. And if you want to look at culture, yeah, that's great. And I said the reason why they share similar cultures is because of their physical location. There's plenty of cultural, what's a good word, appropriation between the two, where they sort of share cultures, but where they don't intermix. And that's my point, is that the origins of this particular ethnic group cannot be sub-Saharan African based on the traits that they carry. Now, culture is a totally different thing, and I would never say that the Egyptians don't share culture with other African groups. Of course they do. It's because of their physical location, but they also share some at one point. Once they start to develop technologically, they also share cultural influence from many different other places around the Middle East. The Nile River Valley is positioned in one of the, I guess, best places for cultural diffusion that you could possibly have because of its close location to many different groups. It's like a crossroad between several different groups of persons. That's why their culture is the way it is. But as far as their genetic origins are concerned and what their classification for race was, all the indication I see is that they come from an admixture of Neolithic European and Neolithic guess what you could call Arabic populations. And from that, they sprouted their own individual ethnic group that does not fit into the framework or does not even cluster together with the sub-Saharan African races. It's so distinct that you can circle it on a principal composition, and it's going to be like a foot away from sub-Saharan Africans.
Okay, and so again, so right, and you're saying this is all really pertaining to genetics and biology, but then again, this is where I'm still having the problem, because
culture is not race. Culture is not an indication of race. You can have cultural diffusion with many different races, many different racial groups in what you would call Israel. They share cultures, but the origins of those races are completely different. So if you're looking at culture, it's not an indication of what their origins are. It's just something that occurs as people live next to each other.
But you don't think that there's that's a kind of a funny argument, but culture is something that I believe that every race, they have certain things that distinguish them culturally. And I think culture is very much a product of race. So I don't think you can just totally say that culture is something that, they just borrowed it. They just borrowed from each other. I mean, again, the Japanese, the Chinese, and the Koreans, they all have very, they share similarities culturally with each other. But then they also there are some small details, I guess you could say, or characteristics about each one of their cultures that would distinguish them. But you know that they came from a common origin, and so that's when ancestrally, I mean, if we want to say, proto-Mongoloids, the Koreans, the Chinese, and Japanese all originated from a common ancestor. Okay, so what I'm saying is, based on culture, the Egyptians share.
I agree. Each individual culture comes from a specific, I guess you could say, genetic origin. Yeah, that's what I agree with that. But the problem is that once you start putting groups close to one another, the tendency of humans based on evolutionary strategy is to share cultures in some way, shape, or form. And it's not like you had a one-to-one similarity between Egypt and the Nubians. It was distinct in a lot of ways, but they share things because of their proximity to one another. And as I said before, if we're talking about the question of the origins of that particular ethnic group, you can't rely solely on culture to do so, because we have people in the United States, both Black Americans and white Americans, who share the exact same culture. Would you say that they're the exact same race? Well, no, they have different origins.
Well, that a lot, I think, has to do more with acculturation and Black Americans assimilating to European culture, as where the Egyptians, because they share a lot of culture with sub-Saharan Africans, some of which is inexplicable because there's no archaeological evidence to prove that the Egyptian, either there was diffusion from the south or there was diffusion from the north into sub-Saharan Africa. As Budge says himself, he says that the culture of the Egyptians had to have, the reason that they shared culture with sub-Saharan Africans all the way over to West Africa is because they shared a common origin with each other. And this is what Budge is saying back in the 20th century.
Right. He doesn't have access to the modern science, I guess you could call it, where we can distinguish between different different origins of people based on their genes. So you can try and say that the origins of someone, where someone is from based on their culture, but that doesn't really hold up to scrutiny. You know, modern culture and even some of the cultures that have died out doesn't really tell you where someone comes from, what their origins are, or what they might have been in the past, because cultures can between groups.
So when you combine the archaeological, cultural, anthropological with also the historical and oral historical sources, okay, because again, I don't know what your feelings or personal feelings about the Bible are, but the Book of Genesis makes it pretty clear that the Egyptians were related to the Sudanese, because
but this also says that the world was created in 7 days. I don't take the Bible as a historical source. It's a mythological source, along with many other mythological texts that say things like Great Flood. Those are cultural events, localized cultural events.
You could, and I understand where you're coming from, but at the same time, you can't totally dismiss the Bible being a historical source, because there are actual historical events that are recorded in the Bible and that match up with, I guess if you want to say, secular history, what seculars have recorded throughout history. And so I feel, my feeling is that you can't just totally just say, oh, well, the Bible is only mythological. Again, I understand if you're not someone who believes in certain doctrines, you don't believe in the divinity of Christ, then, that's your own personal thing. Well, however,
it's if you're going to use like this, I pointed this out to radio as well. You might want to stop screen sharing, by the way. You're broadcasting the Hangout, but when it comes to historical sources, if you want to prove something like, okay, this is the example I gave in the video. Let's say I want to find out what George Washington looked like, right? And you only use text. Okay, you're going to look at the text of someone describing or interacting with George Washington. You can take one source that says, okay, he had dark black skin and an afro, and you can say, okay, well, that's evidence of this or that. But what you need to do to establish fact is to corroborate that with other historical sources. So therein lies the issue, is that are there enough historical sources to corroborate your thesis? And I don't think that there are. And many of the sources that radio uses are contradictory. And especially the Bible in and of itself, there's too many contradictories or too many ways in which, okay, you can kind of say that this event lines up with this event, but it's not explicitly named in the same way. It's a very weak way of showing or making an absolute claim. It just doesn't really hold up. And that's my entire point, is that I want to help you make the thesis better by presenting a better way of showing it. But as far as I can tell, there isn't enough evidence to say one way or the other outside of the genetic argument.
Well, okay, so then let me ask you this question. Are you saying that because to me now this sort of sounds like it's going into the realm of conspiracy. So from my understanding is, according to Josephus, who is a ancient Jewish historian, Moses was, I guess he recorded the Bible, I think some almost 3,000 plus years ago. He recorded the book of Genesis. So from Moses down to Josephus himself, the tradition had been maintained that the ancient Egyptians were black. The Egyptians were related to the Sudanese, which the Hebrew name for Sudan is Cush. So now, are you saying that the Jews, a people who have been around since the time of the Egyptians, that they're, if you want to call the Bible a document, is actually false, or that they're lying, or that they're not being truthful in some way about what they've been saying for thousands of years?
Sure, because if you look at the history of the Bible in and of itself, it's been interpreted, rewritten, and translated into, I don't know, hundreds of different languages. Some of the language has been lost, and in particular, these people. Okay, if you say Moses wrote the Old Testament, I'm sorry, I don't remember what you said. What did you say? Moses wrote the.
He wrote the Old Testament. I'd say I think it was back maybe some 3,000 years ago.
How do we know that Moses wrote the Old Testament? I'm sorry, I'm not trying to get you there. I'm generally curious. How do we know that Moses wrote the Old Testament?
Well, I'm going based off of what, again, Josephus, who was a historian himself, an ancient Jewish historian, he says that Moses recorded the book of Genesis. That's where my source for that is coming from.
It's not a primary source. That's my issue. It's not even a secondary source. This is the issue with the Bible in and of itself, is that you have thousands of years of people interfering with the writings and picking and choosing what stories they want to include because it's a holy text. Now, it doesn't really hold up to scrutiny. You can say that, okay, well, Josephus said, and then, okay, what do you say? And now he's saying that this person wrote that. Okay, well, where did he get that from? What's his source on that? It's an endless cycle of there not being enough information to really prove it beyond a reasonable doubt.
Okay, but so the Jews have 114 IQ or something like that, and my understanding is where Josephus must have gotten his information is just the traditions that had been passed down since the Exodus, when the Hebrews left Egypt and settled in Israel, which was previously known as Canaan. So to me, it's just like, why would the Jews maintain this tradition for 3,000 years? Especially now, we have according to yourself, we have the genetic evidence that supposedly it proves that the ancient Egyptians were, related to Neolithic farmers. But the Jews have not changed the tradition themselves. I mean, we're not talking about translation, okay? Where the Anglo peoples later came and
it's about tradition. Yeah, I understand.
Right. But even in the Hebrew language itself, the story has stayed the same for almost 3,000 years. Moses, since the time of Moses down to Josephus, the Hebrews and later the Jews have said that the ancient Egyptians were black because they were related to the people called Cush. In Israel today, the Israelis or the Jews refer to a black person as Cush or Cushi, which is stems from their own language in the Bible. So if the Egyptians were related to Cush, which is Sudan, according to their tradition, I don't know how we cannot take that as a,
Well, one, because it's an oral tradition. These things change. Secondly, it is a tradition. I mean, I know the traditions of the ancient European religions, and many of them have falsified a lot of history simply because they're looking at it from a different perspective, And so whatever these Jews may say about their tradition and how they interact with people, it's from their own perspective. It is not a concrete, beyond a reasonable doubt way of saying that, okay, we're sub-Saharan Africans. It's a tradition. It's subject to change over the course of time,
Right. But you don't. I'm sorry. Go ahead. My apologies.
No, it's fine. I lost my train of thought. These traditions. I mean, these traditions just don't really hold up. I mean, also, Jews have never lied before in the past.
I mean, like I said, and I'm not saying that all human beings tell lies. It's just funny to me that 3,000 years has gone by, but they haven't made any change. Because they have a clear.
Right, so what makes that's what I'm getting to is what makes that tradition the truth.
Okay, so this is where I can kind of corroborate actual anthropology with the biblical tradition. So according to, just to give you a brief rundown of what the actual Bible, what the book of Genesis says. Okay, so there were three races that came from three biblical patriarchs. Shem is the father of the Caucasian race. He's not the father of just the Jews and the Arabs. He's the father of the entire Caucasian race. That's from Europe, I guess you could say northwestern Europe, all the way to northwestern India, passing through Central Asia and the Levant. All of those people are Caucasian.
Yeah, they're part of the Indo-Aryan tradition.
Right. Then you have the Hamites, who are descended from Ham, and that's all of the black people, the black-skinned peoples of the earth. So that would include sub-Saharan Africans, South Asians, the Dravidian South Indians, the Australian Aborigines, and the Melanesians. Those are all of the descendants of Ham. And then you have Japheth, who is the father of the Mongoloid race, the East Asians, the Native Americans, the Alaskan Inuits, all of those people. Okay, so originally in the 20th century, there were only three, major racial classifications that were, I don't agree with Australoid or anything like that. To me, it's just nonsense. But you had the Mongoloid, the Caucasoid, and the Negroid. Okay, corroborating that with the Bible, you have Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Shem, Caucasian, Ham, Negroid, and Japheth, Mongoloid. So to me, it matches up. I mean, that's kind of where I'm having the issue. And then, so to address another point you made, now, as far as I'm concerned, when you go back to 1895 with this guy here, Giuseppe Sergi, he published his book, The Mediterranean Race. Now, in his book, because I have it and I've read it, he lies about the fact that the Maasai, the Afar, and other East African peoples, he lies about the fact that they're Caucasian. I don't know what was going on in his mind when he was writing this book, and he just kind of exaggerated their features, because I have plenty of photos of these guys, different ethnic groups. None of them look Caucasian. But in his book, he actually says that they are, in fact, Caucasian, and that the Mediterranean race came from these East African peoples, which he calls Hamites, because I think Sergi was desperately trying to connect Greek and Roman civilization to Egypt, which, again, when you look at the actual racial, when you look at the actual depictions of Egyptians, and then you study their culture, again, the psychology, their behavior, or behavioral psychology, sociology, and again, all that, what you could say is the basis of cultural anthropology. Let me put it that way. The Egyptians share, I'd say, if I had to do it percentage-wise, I'd say they share at least 90% of their culture with sub-Saharan Africans. Then you take the linguistic factor into account. The Egyptians don't speak any Indo-European languages. They spoke a Afro-Semitic language, as we know of it today. The Arabs and the Jews are the only Caucasian peoples on planet Earth that speak Semitic languages, but all of the other Caucasian peoples speak Indo-European languages. So, to me, this is where I'm having a problem, because you go back far enough into I guess you could say the racial theories about the ancient Egyptians, you eventually are going to hit a wall, and that wall is Sergi. Sergi is, as far as I can tell, he is the first European anthropologist to come out with this, and is just what it is. He's the first European anthropologist to write this lie, saying that East Africans were Caucasians. So going back to 1895, now why would he write a book where he lies about the fact that these East Africans are Caucasians? As far as I know, from Sergi onward, no other Europeans anthropologists ever made any attempt to correct, I guess, or to challenge his views, and they just kept running with it. So now, when we come to the modern genetic science, and the genetic science of today is saying that, oh yeah, the Egyptians are Caucasians. You don't see that as basically trying to maintain this lie that Sergi started?
I'm not familiar with Sergi's work, but just we run into a couple of issues here. One, most of the anthropology and the science that was done in the 19th century has already been built upon, to the point where we get today, where a lot of this stuff is sort of like half-truths. If you look at the Egyptologist Council, they hold like yearly meetings and shit. They did 1 year where they were talking about Afrocentrism and how it's essentially incorrect according to all the studies that they've done. But really, if you're talking about culture and you want to examine culture, yeah, groups share culture. They diffuse with one another based on their location. But culture is not an indication of where someone comes from. The other issue that I think that you're having here is that you're clustering the world into 3 racial groups. And that's not how racial groups work. You can use it as a generalized term to describe things to people, but Arabs and Jews they're not Caucasoids. They're a distinct group. They don't share very many genetic similarities with Europeans or Indians or even Africans.
Okay, yes. And you've just made another excellent point. You said that the Arabs and Jews, so according to you, now I don't know, what's your, just because I'm curious, what's your personal origin or background? Like, you come, are you mostly Northwestern European descent?
Yeah, it's all Anglo-Saxon.
Okay. So again, because I've looked at the haplogroup map and everything like that. So I understand that I think the dominant haplogroup in the Middle East is J, haplogroup J. And so, right, Europeans, I think, are more haplogroup. A lot of Europeans have haplogroup or belong to haplogroup R. That's the dominant Y chromosome lineage in Western, Central, and I think Northeastern Europe. But The Arabs don't. Again. My thing is, why did they have to have the same exact haplogroup, or share the same haplogroup as with Europeans in order to be considered Caucasian? Because Australian Aborigines don't have the same haplogroup as most sub-Saharan Africans, but based on their anatomical or somatological or morphological, physiological characteristics, they would be considered Negroid. And I'm not about to admit that. Okay, you have one population over here and one population over here. They look similar because there's a parallel in the environments. Therefore, that is why they kind of look similar to each other. As again, when you go to the biblical tradition, it kind of already explains, it just lays it out. The Caucasians all came from Shem. The Mongoloids all came from Japheth, and the Negroes or the Negroid peoples all came from Ham. I mean, to me, that's just clear. You can clearly see, if you look at the entire world and all of the different ethnic groups, you can clearly see you have 3 distinct races. That's it. You have a lot of variation within each one of those racial groups. You could say sub-races, but there are clearly only 3 races. So for me, that's why I'm not interested in politicizing ancient Egyptians' race. I'm not interested in arbitrary definitions of race. I'd rather stick to what physical anthropologists have known about race for the last at least 100 years. And it's clear that there's only 3 races on planet Earth. Therefore, the Egyptians have to fit into one of those races. Based on culture, it couldn't be Caucasian. My personal belief about the genetic stuff that's coming out today is that that's all just to maintain white supremacy. That's so. Yeah, I'm going to stop there, and I will.
Sure, yeah, the chat is dying to know what your ethnic background is. I'm sorry, we have to know. Are you African American or Moorish? What do we got going on here? And then
I am sub-Saharan African descent. I'll put it that way.
Okay. Okay. So, first of all, the classification of race it's almost, what's the word? It's almost up to the interpretation of the person, because you could classify each individual ethnic group as a different racial group if you wanted to. But I don't think that really fits that way. It's kind of up to interpretation, and the way that we've come to a conclusion in science today that there are many different racial categories. Now, I would agree. Yeah, if you're looking at it in general, yeah, I would say that there's 3 generalized racial groups. And if you want to put Egyptians in Negroid, I guess you could, but they, like I said, they don't really fit within that classical definition of Negroid. They just don't.
The classical. So what's the classical definition of Negroid? Okay, so you're basing. Okay, so you're saying like a broad nose, sort of instead of having like a more upright skull shape forehead, they have more.
Yeah. And more shooting jawline, and they have a different skeletal structure as well. Their bones are more dense than other racial groups, essentially.
Okay. That's very interesting to me. It's funny because now when you look at the artwork of ancient Egyptians themselves, and this is an image of Mentuhotep II. You can clearly see that he has features that are Negroid. Yeah, the nose is quite small, but you find that exact type nose shape or structure, morphology in East Africa. The lips as well. They're kind of everted and protruding. The cheekbones, everything you can see right here in Mentuhotep II's statue. His appearance does not resemble anything that looks like a Caucasian. So to me, it makes no sense that the Egyptians would continuously depict themselves the same way for 3,000 years.
But they don't depict themselves like this all the time. It's so different in between which dynasty and who made it. It's not like this particular style of artwork is consistent. It's not.
Okay.
There's very different kinds, and you can't come to a conclusive statement based off of a couple of pieces of artwork. Well,
again, this is, believe me when I say this, it's not.
We're closed.
Oh, you're closed? Okay. Believe me, it's not just a couple pieces of artwork. I have
Right, and I'll leave that for my presentation during the debate. Let me just check the chat real here for any more questions. I'll leave it at that because I'd like to continue this, but I've been on stream for like 3 hours now. But yeah, I'm looking forward to the debate. Hopefully we can flesh this out a little bit more. So, and I'll present my full thing there. But it was good talking to you, man. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it.
All right, everybody, we're going to close off the stream here. It's been 3 hours, so thanks for tuning in. I'll see you later.